We're going to call this meeting to order. Mr. Vice Chair, will you please have a roll call?
Yes, sir. Mark Prescott,
Present.
Paul Gutierrez present. Steve Jacobs,
Present.
Nathan Luzier,
Present.
John Nicholas.
Here.
Okay. Chair's comments. Thank you to the participants, the audience who've shown up today. I really appreciate your time and being here and helping us work through these issues. I want to also thank the subcommittee members for their time, spending all day here and working with us to move the subject matter forward. Our meeting is being webcast, and I'd like to first introduce our DCA Staff Counsel, Tara Welch, who will be providing a review of the Vaguely Keen Open Meeting Act under Agenda Item D. Thank you, Tara. Today we have Dennis Zanke and Lucine Sarkissian from DCA Solid, and they're facilitators that will be leading us through the discussion of Agenda Item E. Also, Tracy Montez, thank you for being with us. She's the DCA Chief of Division of Programs and Policy Review, who will be providing us a brief overview of the department's examination development considerations as part of Agenda Item E in our discussion today. We'll be taking a lunch break at 12 noon today. And I'd like to advise the subcommittee of voting requirements. All motions and seconds will be repeated for the record, and votes on all motions will be taken by roll call. So it won't be a simple yes or no. We'll actually take a roll call on all actions today. Next item, review of the objective of the subcommittee. Brianna, will you please speak that on?
Absolutely. So agenda item C is, as Mark mentioned, the review of the objective of the subcommittee. So the purpose for this agenda item is kind of to provide a quick recap of how we got to today, and then, as you all have volunteered time, subcommittee was to help make a recommendation to the LATC for the initial licensure pathway to provide kind of an overview of what the charge is. So currently, applicants for initial licensure must have a combined education experience credit to 6 years. And for the education pathway, overarchingly speaking, the degrees must be in landscape architecture. You can have an extension certificate in landscape architecture, or you can have a degree in architecture, and that architectural degree must be accredited by the National Architectural Accreditation Board. So that's where we currently stand with our pathways. Way back in June, we brought a reciprocity proposal to the board that would change our reciprocity licensure procedures. During the discussion, the Architects Board offered LATC the directive that, you really need to align your initial and reciprocal licensure procedures, and also we request that you make them near the boards wherever possible. Notably, the board's pathways include related degrees, non-related degrees, and an experience-only pathway. So that's what staff did. We went back and we looked at CCR 2620, which is our table of equivalents for initial licensure, and we amended it using the board's table of equivalents, which is their CCR 117, and we really used, we revamped it to what the board has, and we used those same new pathways that the board uses, which is, as I mentioned, related degrees, both baccalaureate and associate, unrelated degrees, baccalaureate and associate, and an experience-only pathway. So we brought that to the LATC at the July 13th meeting, and at that time the LATC approved all pathways existing and new as worded, but established the Education Experience Subcommittee to vet those new 5 pathways. And as you have them here on Agenda Item C, they're listed 1 through 5, and as I mentioned, there's the field related to landscape architecture that consists of at least a 4-year curriculum, a degree in a field related to landscape architecture that consists of at least a 2-year curriculum, the field unrelated to landscape architecture of at least 4-year curriculum, a field unrelated to landscape architecture of at least a 2-year curriculum, and then finally, experience as or experience attained under the direct supervision of a licensed landscape architect at experiential pathway. So what the LATC is asking you all to do is, considering these new pathways, to evaluate them, define related degrees, define experience only, unrelated degrees, and allocate those experience education credits therein. So succinctly, your charge is to recommend amendments to 2620, that in those recommendations we will bring back to the LATC at our next meeting on November 2nd. And those amendments would be, as I mentioned, defining what related and unrelated in education, experience would be, and then allocating recommended credit for each of those pathways. And I know Doug wanted to add something to that as well.
Yes, thank you. So Brianna provided an excellent overview of some of the more precise prescriptive elements of licensure for this profession, various pathways, both on the education side and experience side, but I also wanted to give you a mile-high view of some of the factors that are influencing our current climate as a regulatory body. So there are a number of things to consider. First, there was a White House report from the prior administration that assessed the prevalence of licensure and how the number of professions and trades regulated by state entities has increased exponentially over the last 50 years. And looked at a number of related issues as to whether or not such license categories are needed to protect the public. And if they are the requirements reasonable, defensible, and tied to that bare minimum standard of protecting the public and entry-level competence. From there, we also have a Supreme Court decision in North Carolina Dental Board versus the Federal Trade Commission. And in that case, the court looked at whether decisions made by a licensing body, if they're potentially anti-competitive, what does that mean as to the liability immunity from the board members? So it looked at active market participants, licensees on the governing body, making decisions that might benefit the profession versus protect the public. The particular case dealt with enforcement issues, but the types of themes in that case might also apply to decisions concerning licensing and educational experience standards. One of the parties, as I noted, was the Federal Trade Commission, and partially as an offshoot of that case, there's now an economic liberty task force within the Federal Trade Commission that is looking at a number of state initiatives on this issue. There's also federal funding for some major coalitions to look at licensure systems for various professions. So there's a lot of movement at the national level through that venue as well. Additionally, at the state level, our Little Hoover Commission also prepared an assessment very similar to the one that the White House conducted, looking at licensure in California, what are barriers to licensure, what are other issues related to regulating the marketplace. So taken together, all of these factors really mean that we really have to have a strong view whenever we make decisions as to whether we're protecting the public or whether we're embracing standards that may not be defensible. And so I tend to reiterate this message whenever we're looking at an issue, whether it's enforcement related, whether we're looking at the experience program for landscape architects, et cetera. So I just want the committee to be mindful of this overall tone in our climate when we're making policy decisions.
Thank you, Doug and Brianna. Item number D. Tara, will you please review the applicable Open Meeting Act requirements?
Okay, so Ontario Chapter Council's meeting landscape architects.
Could you speak up, please? Very hard to hear you out here.
Sure. So as you're deliberating education and experience credits, which is a quick description of why you're here today, one of your responsibilities as subcommittee members is to comply as individuals and as a body with the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, which requires that actions of state agencies be taken openly and that their deliberation be conducted. I'm here today to provide you with a brief overview of the basic requirements of the Open Meeting Act, its purpose, how to recognize when a situation is a meeting, and the consequences of violating the law. To remember the general requirements of the Act, we use a mnemonic, popcorn. Never attend a meeting without it. So P is for public. The public has these rights: the right to attend and record meetings without being disruptive, the right to comment on board, committee, and subcommittee actions, the right to copy and inspect records. People of California do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. O is for open session. Business of the subcommittee must be conducted in open session unless closed session is authorized by law. There are reasons for a closed session. You can discuss matters under the Administrative Procedure Act, examinations, executive officer personnel matters, but not because an item is controversial or embarrassing. As this subcommittee has a limited purpose and time frame, you will not be holding this session. P is for penalties for violating the Open Meeting Act, which would include the decisions or actions of the subcommittee may be invalidated, and misdemeanor, a violation of the Open Meeting Act with intent to deprive the public of information is a misdemeanor. C is for communications. Decisions are made at subcommittee meetings. You can't use serial or hub and spoke communication methodologies to discuss, deliberate, or take action on subcommittee business. This includes technology such as email communications. An example of a serial or hub and spoke communication is two members of the subcommittee meeting for lunch and discussing possible revisions to the Practice Act or regulations. After the meeting, one of those members calls a third member to encourage support for the revisions. This is an impermissible serial communication. The Open Meeting Act permits contacts or communications between a member of a state body and any other person, provided that the communications are not serial. O is for 1 + 2 = 3. The definition of a meeting includes any congregation of a majority of the members of a state body at the same time and place to hear, discuss, or deliberate upon any item that is within the subject matter jurisdiction of the state body to which it pertains. But note, meetings of the subcommittee need to be noticed and open to the public. The exception, of course, is that if there's an advisory committee with less than 3 persons without any delegated authority, you would not need to notice the meeting. R is for roadmap, which is provided in this agenda. The agenda needs to be brief, but provide specific description of the matters to be considered and the business transacted. This is generally a reasonableness test. There's no new or old business, and it is a sword and a shield. Generally, the rule is if an item is not on the agenda, the subcommittee cannot talk about it or take action on it. N is for notice. A notice of the subcommittee meeting must be posted at least 10 days in advance of the meeting. The notice must set forth the time and location of the meeting, as well as a contact person in the event more information is needed. For a teleconference, locations must be specified, and these locations must be accessible to the public and ADA compliant. That's all I have, just a quick overview. Are there any questions? Okay, I am leaving the meeting at this point, but I am available in case any questions arise.
Thank you very much, Tara.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to the meat of the matter. Item E, discuss and possible recommendation to amend California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Division 26, Section 2620, to define and prescribe allowable credit for initial licensure. I'm going to turn this over to Brianna.
Okay, so as you mentioned, Mark, this is it. This is the meat and potatoes of today's meeting. We're going to turn it over very shortly to the DCA Solid facilitators, Dennis and Lucy, to help guide this discussion. But I wanted to just provide a brief overview of what you have in section E of your meeting packet, because in consideration of the charge that you're looking at those 5 pathways and considering credit allocation, defining them, we wanted to provide you as much material as we could that could help guide that decision. So it's a bit tedious, but I just kind of wanted to quickly go over what's in your packet, what's in your resources here, and then when we get to each section, I'll also kind of provide a brief introduction of things to consider that we found as well. So, quick overview of your attachments. You have as attachment 1 those current pathways that I mentioned earlier in a visual graphic form, showing the current landscape architectural degree, credit allocation, accredited experience, as well as the architecture. And again, this is out of 6 years total. In attachment 2, this is kind of a working document if you'd like to make it as such. Attachment 2 shows, again, those current pathways as well as those 5 that you're going to be vetting today. If you want to, let's call this the coloring book. If you're visual and want to shade this in so you can see the continuum of how we might be parsing out credit, you're welcome to do so. As I mentioned, I feel this one could be a workable document. Agenda E3 is a chart detailing the pathways to licensure in consideration of what California currently offers, as well as what we're discussing here today as those 5 new pathways. We wanted to provide you something which details what the other states are doing. So relative to, for instance, when you're discussing a related 4-year degree, this could be a referential tool for you to see what other states are doing in that area. Same thing for the rest of the other 4 topics today. Attachment 4 provides basically the same, with just a little bit more in a more visual way. Attachments 5 and 6 are content areas and KSAs for the California CSE exam as well as the LAIR. When you're considering perhaps related degrees, this might be something you might want to reference and think about what is being tested on. So we wanted to include those for you. Attachment 7 are the accreditation curriculum standards for the LAB, the Landscape Architectural Accreditation Board, NAV, the Architectural Accreditation Board, as well as ABET, if you choose to consider civil engineering as a related degree. We're almost done, I promise. Then we've got a brief overview of associate degree requirements as attachment 8. Attachment 9 is the FLAR model law and model regulations, as they included some recommended related degrees and credit allocation in there. We thought you all might want to reference it. Attachment 10 is that CCR 117, the board's table of equivalents. So if you wish to look at what the board offers. And then last but not least, we have in attachment 11, public comment that was received up until the point where we had to assemble and distribute the meeting packet. You all have blue folders on your table, which include public comment that was received subsequent to the meeting packet dissemination. And then that was up until 2 p.m. yesterday when we had to assemble those. And we received some overnight, so we're having staff print those and bring them in later today for you all to see as well. So, I know it's a lot, but I wanted to give you all just a rundown of your toolbox, so to speak. And if you don't have any questions about that, then I'll go ahead and turn it over to Dennis and Lucy to guide the rest of the session.
Do you all have any questions on what Brianna covered? All right. I'm going to give you the lay of the land today. So like I mentioned, this is Lucy and Dennis. We'll alternate today, so sometimes I'll be speaking, sometimes you will describe and alternate. A couple things to point out is we're a neutral non-party, so solid within DCA. We work with the different boards and bureaus for subcommittee meetings, committee meetings, board meetings, and for stakeholder meetings. Our job is to extract your ideas and thoughts and reasoning behind things and document that, and to get you all to come to at least some kind of consensus or agreement on things. So the reason I point that out is between the public or between you all. You may say things that we don't quite understand, so we might ask for clarification just to make sure that we get it right. We're going to provide some structure today, which I'll talk about. We're going to document the discussion. but we do have a relatively crunched time frame, so we're going to ask people to keep your comments to a minimum, and I'm going to ask your permission in advance to maybe keep conversation going. So if we have something that's already documented, I might just ask, hey, have we commented or captured what you wanted to say, so that we can just keep things moving. Like I mentioned, we have a short time, so there's 5 different areas, so we have about 45 minutes for each area. Mark mentioned that we'll have lunch around noon. He said exactly noon. It might be a little before, it might be a little after. We'll judge like where people are. Depending on how the day goes, we might have a morning and afternoon break. We'll just see. If you need it, you need it. If you don't, you don't. It's better to keep coming along. And I want to point out, the whole purpose of the committee meeting today is the first focus is consumer protection. We're all here today to make sure that these pathways to licensure benefit the consumer. And so just know that if there's ever a decision to be made and we're balancing on a fence, we should always go and choose the side of consumer protection first. Make sense? Everybody in agreement with that? Perfect. These are mainly for the public or for anyone else. I'm not going to actually review them, but I think, do they have these in their handouts as well? Okay, cool. So these are some acronyms that we're going to use, so you know what we're talking about when we talk about lab, OBED, NAV, BART. This is what we're talking about. Yeah?
Do you have any sort of a chart that shows how these interact with each other, who has jurisdiction over the other? This, somebody new to this is a lot of information. I was reading through it trying to figure that out.
I don't, but did you?
We don't have anything insofar as how they interact with each other.
Well, I can speak to it at some level, particularly as to NAV, and I'm assuming if someone knows otherwise, John, you've been involved with the governance at the national level, but for architecture, the accrediting body is actually comprised of what we call the collateral organization. So for example, you have the professional group, AIA, has a certain number of seats on the board of directors, governance-wise. The student association has the same amount, et cetera. The licensing board entity, so I'm going to assume that LAAB is structured similarly, but I'm not positive. That work?
And Steve, if I may, they're all related, but they don't govern one another. They speak to one another occasionally.
There's not really a hierarchy. It's just they're equivalent.
So they all those different groups deal with different subjects. CLAR primarily preparing the national exam for landscape architects, and LAAB accrediting the schools of landscape architecture to make sure they meet their standards for accreditation. So they're different subject matter, but they deal with qualifying landscape architects for licensing landscape architecture on a national level. And then the other two are allied professional bodies that deal with civil engineers or architects. Does that help a little?
Yeah, it helps a little. I mean, I teach a class, and one of the first things I do is I teach landscape contracting class, and I teach about what's the CLCA and what's the CSLB, because the public and most of my students have no idea the differences of those two. So that's or 3 or 4 different associations. One that represents contractors, and the other one is a state organization that licenses us. So it's very clear, and I just want to be clear on these different associations.
All right, so the next 2 slides are just a reminder of kind of what Brianna covered. These are the existing pathways to licensure now. As you can see, the totals always total up to 6 years. Anybody have any questions or need any clarification on what you see here? All right, if you're visual, it's the same thing. You're all good. You have these on pages 11 and 12, I think, in your handouts. Did I get those page numbers right? I thought this was. Are they page numbers or attachments?
This is attachment
Oh,
one.
I remembered in the PDF. Whoops. So, whoops. All right. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Tracy for a bit to talk about the 3 E's.
Happy to do so. So again, I am the chief of the Division of Programs and Policy Review for the department. One of the units in my division is called the Office of Professional Examination Services. We're like a little internal consulting firm that works with the boards, bureaus, and programs to help ensure that they meet the mandates of Business and Professions Code Section 139, which basically says that the boards and programs should have licensing examinations that are fair, valid, and legally defensible. And so we worked with both architects, board, landscape architects committee for a number of years. We have nice solid exams, and that's great. What we're starting to do now, it's taken us about 20 years, but we finally have our folks, including the legislature, understanding the components of having this legally defensible examination program. Now we're starting to spread out, and we're looking at things like minimum qualifications to licensure, reciprocity issues, and continuing ed, because all of those factors still need to be what we would say fair, valid, and legally defensible. That's kind of the lingo that we use. And often, again, we always fall back on Business and Professions Code Section 139. That is based on national testing standards and federal guidelines for regulatory and even general selection procedures. So we've sort of taken what's out there in the world, and we've created this code so that our boards and bureaus can make sure that they have very robust programs. So my job here today is to kind of help you as needed and remind you that it's not only the examination that's critical in terms of being defensible, but also making sure that any educational requirements and experience requirements are also very robust. And that's one of the reasons why you have all these attachments and materials here, because we need to make sure that things are job related and occupational related. Now, while you do that, that's usually the easy part. We also have to keep in mind that we don't want to create any artificial barriers to licensure, because as Doug mentioned, there's a lot of scrutiny on the national level as well as the state level about restriction into professions. You know, why do we have all these regulations? Why do we have all these requirements, these hurdles, these mandates, when we really need people to be able to move across state lines and to be able to get licensed and have a job and contribute to the economy. So what we need to do is we need to balance that with consumer protection. How can we create opportunities for individuals to enter into a license that is robust, job-related, and defensible, but at the same time doesn't impose barriers or impact individuals from entering into the profession? So that, again, that's why you have all of this information here, and why we're here to help, if you have questions, to kind of guide you on that, because, again, as Dennis mentioned, consumer protection is ultimately the priority, but we need to be mindful of those that want to come into the profession, and how can we do that in a fair and valid manner.
All right, got it. Just to reiterate what your charge is, define and prescribe allowable credit for, you can see we have three main areas: related degrees, non-related degrees, bachelor's and associate, and then experience only. So we're going to go by each one of these one by one. Like I mentioned, we have about 45 minutes for each area, so we need to keep the conversation concise, but definitely get your thoughts and feelings known. We'll document the discussion as we go. So if you have an idea and someone's speaking and you see that they've captured it, then we're good. But if you want to add to it, that's all right too. Kind of as Brianna mentioned, this is what we have in a visual thing. You've got a handout where if you want to just pencil in how you think that might start to shape out and look, so you can see it as it progresses. And with that, we'll start with related degree and bachelor's degree. And I'll give you a minute to review this. Got it? Comments or questions? So with that, the way we thought we'd lay with the roll of the land is we'll collect your comments, we'll document them here so everyone can see, and then let me show you what we're going to do on the next slide. We're going to do this for each area. Then we're going to ask each committee member just to tell us how many years or months of education credit and training experience credit. We'll kind of get a synopsis of what you all are thinking. And then if we need to, we'll go back to any discussion points that we have. And then we'll have you all make a recommendation. So that at the end of each section, we're going to have the recommendation of what you all, as a subcommittee, suggest to the LETC. Is that easy, manageable? Yes.
If we have something to say, shall we raise our hand and you will recognize us?
I am so glad you say that. Yes. So it would be great. Yeah, just because everybody's going to at one point want to speak at the same time, and that we only have 2 years, so 4 combined. So yeah, if you could raise your hand and speak, just so we can. And my job is to keep it in order, make sure everybody gets to be heard, make sure there's full participation. But also, too, to keep us on time. So let's start with this one here, pathways to initial licensure, related degrees and bachelor's. Oh, you sure can.
All right, so on agenda item E, cover page, you all have kind of a brief synopsis of findings for each of the areas, related degrees, non-related degrees, and experience only. So I just kind of wanted to point out a few takeaways from the related degrees and reviewing your toolbox of resources, so to speak. So we wanted to point out that in reference to what the Architects Board offers, they offer 2 years of credit for a related bachelor degree or degree of at least 4-year curriculum, and that's 2 years out of their 8-year requirement. Also, in looking at attachment 3, that entire table of what other states offer, we found that 29 states allow for a related baccalaureate degree. Also, looking at the CLARB model law and CLARB model regulations, we found that they too offer in this newest set of model regulations that they offer to all of their jurisdictions to adopt if they so choose, the allowance of related degrees, and those related degrees they indicated were architecture and civil engineering. And they, in their model regulations, said out of 5-year education experience credit, they allocated 4 years of education credit to that. So what you have is on page 2 of the agenda item E cover sheet, we have a little table of topic and all the corresponding attachments. The good news and bad news for related degrees is all the attachments we found are relevant and corresponding to the subject matter. We did a little bit of research after disseminating the packet because we did see that civil engineering popped up quite often, and that's why you see that up on this slide here as a potential ABET certified civil engineering degree as a possible related degree if you so choose. We saw, just doing quick research, that approximately 29 states do recognize in some capacity a civil engineering degree or related degree. And then also I wanted to point out that the architecture degree, it is an existing pathway. However, we wanted to bring to your consideration that given we're now parsing out, related degrees and unrelated degrees, perhaps you all might want to move the architecture degree into that related field, since we're now kind of segmenting. So those were the quick comments I wanted to just highlight from this section, and then I'll turn it back over to Dennis.
So we'll start out with, are there any comments or thoughts about related degrees? Comments you want to have?
Yeah. Question. So for the related degrees, is our task now to look at what those related degrees are, or kind of defining the number of years?
It's actually both. The types of degrees that the committee is willing to recommend and consider, and then how many years of that degree should I have? How many years of study should I have in that? And the training and experience under a landscape architect. So both of those. And so one way we could start is, if you want, we can list out all the degree types and see how we feel about those. It's a good place to start. Actually, if somebody in the public has a comment, so did you want to say who you are? And then
Sure.
You don't have to, but if you want to.
Hi, my name is Dustin Maxim.
It would help if you don't mind standing up.
Yeah.
Just so the voice carries better.
Hi, my name is Dustin Maxim, and I've been at this Odyssey for a long time now. I have 15 years experience in the industry. I'm a registered landscape architect in the state of Nevada since 2011. I originally applied for reciprocity to California in 2012, and me and John Fight started this process with the reciprocity issue. Anyway, since then it snowballed into complete overhaul of the system. But why I want to speak to you right now is because I want to float a definition of what I would like you to consider a related degree. And I would just say, please consider that any discipline that contributes to the planning, spatial analysis, structure, and environment of a built space as a related degree. I'm happy to repeat that. So planning, spatial analysis, structure, and environment.
And don't worry about typos, we'll clean those up. So our main job is to capture the thoughts. All right, and then, so we're good there, and then, yeah.
My name is Laura Taylor. I've been licensed in 3 states for 22 years prior to coming to California. And I have a comment on the education, and I would like to request that if you make changes to the rules for education requirements, that you preserve the educational requirements in lieu of a experience-only pathway. Then I think you need to modify the rules to allow related college-level coursework rather than specific degrees. That you modify the rules to allow professional development hours to count towards educational requirements. A licensed professional who has been required to obtain 12 professional development hours a year to maintain licensure over many years may be more qualified than a California licensed professional who has not actively practiced and has not kept up with the profession through ongoing professional development. And I think that you should require ongoing professional development if you're going to insist upon educational requirements. Thank you.
All right, so we have just 2 comments so far. Contributing planning, spatial analysis, structure, environment, there are 3 types, and then preserving the educational requirement and including related college work and professional development. Does the committee members have anything that you want to add to this list? Yeah.
I do. I think those are both good comments, and I'd like to understand a little bit how this relates to the California Architects Board suggestion to or a mandate to create kind of a parallel pathways compared to the California Architects Board, I guess, requirements related to testing and I guess to any continuing education. I'm not sure in California if the architects have continuing education, but I know we don't as landscape architects. I want to see if there was a difference there. So, do architects have continuing education requirements?
Sort of. They have a requirement for 5 hours, but only on disabled access issues. So that's the only requirement in terms of CE. In terms of the core licensure requirements, again, it's the flexible multiple pathways, including experience only. As part of the experience component for initial licensure, there is a structured internship program administered via NCARB, which is called the Architectural Experience Program, which takes about 2 years. In that program, a number of key knowledge areas within the profession are specified, and you have to accrue a certain number of hours in each of those areas.
And testing, of the kind of differences in testing?
Sure. There's a national exam like for LUC. 6 division exams, separate distinct divisions. You have to pass each of them. And then there's also like for LUC, a California supplemental exam that you have to pass.
All right.
If I could just add a little bit to that, because I couldn't find an equivalent AXT or landscape experience program like the architectural side of the fence is. Whereas the AXP is pretty prescriptive and requires evidence-based portfolio of completed hours of kind of work under the supervision of a licensed architect. I couldn't find that equivalent in the landscape arena. So it sort of speaks to professional development as being receiving that credit.
Excuse me, Pascal,
yes.
can you define what AXP is?
AXP is an acronym for Architectural Experience Program, formerly known as the IDP, Intern Development Program. It's evolved into the AXP. Also, the number of hours have evolved. It used to be 5,740. It's now 3,740. And it's more specific to criteria that a practicing architect would perform. There used to be, even going further back, there used to be a CIDP, when we had the IDP program, which is a comprehensive overlay to the IDP program, which was NCARTS. I guess your equivalent of CalArc or Clark. The reason for that was that California felt that the IDP program was time-based, simply the number of hours that the supervisor rights that you have in the profession or in the field of work. So California created a comprehensive IDP program which paralleled the IDP but required evidence portfolios or work samples. Therefore, you had the California CIDP, which was evidence-based, as opposed to the NCARB IDP, which was time-based. I think that may be a disparity that I'm seeing now from what I can see in the landscape profession.
Are there
Just a quick note, if I may. That's absolutely well said, and you hit a lot of the key points. And just as a side note, relative to landscape architecture, LETC recognizes the value of the good work NCARB has done on AXP and is in fact going to request that Clark in the future consider developing a structured internship program like AXP.
So any other thoughts or ideas on which actual degrees would be relevant?
Yeah, what I've seen is that there really are no, other than architecture and civil engineering, there are no other related degrees that have been really presented as related.
Okay.
What might those be?
Well, actually, that's what you all, is it only the, yeah.
If we're, just to echo the planning, space, it's a third one.
Planning, spatial analysis, structure, and environment of built space.
I would think that something could be drawn from the urban planning degree,
Okay.
as well as from the environmental science degree.
We submitted a list of proposed related degrees we'd like to consider on part of our public comment. They include engineering, urban planning and design, city and regional
Actually, can
planning.
you read it a little bit slower so we can capture it?
Sure. Engineering, urban planning and design, city and regional planning, geography, environmental design, environmental studies, environmental horticulture, parks and natural resource management, environmental studies after geography, yeah. Environmental horticulture, parks and natural resource management, urban forestry. So after environmental horticulture, parks and natural resource management. Then urban forestry, then landscape planning and design, or landscape design. And maybe even agriculture and community development. Community development.
All right, so these are things for the committee to consider. You take them, you can leave them, you can choose ones that you like, ones that you don't like. So one place I guess we could start is from the committee's perspective. Are there ones in here that you say, yeah, absolutely? It sounds like we kind of all, or may agree that architectural civil engineering, is that something the committee generally agrees that is worth considering?
Yes.
All right, so if we put like an asterisk, right? Oh yeah, yes is even better. This way we won't remember what the asterisk means. So, and then if you're cool with it, we'll just go down each one and just get the committee's kind of temperature check. You're not being held anything right now, just what's the temperature check? So urban planning and designs, everybody have thoughts of why it should or should not be considered a related degree?
Yes.
Go, all right, so we'll put a yes there. How about city and regional planning?
Yes.
I hear 2 or 3 yeses.
The only thing I would say is they seem like the same, so it's maybe just captures the
Yeah,
urban
that's true.
design.
Oh, okay. And how about geography? Thoughts on that?
That's my major.
Yes.
I hear 1 yes, but I saw a shoulder shrug too, so
Maybe.
maybe. So we'll put a maybe there. Did you, and then,
Yeah, I guess, so, related to these, I guess the architecture, civil, are, I think, very obvious because they're professions that can result in kind of a built,
Place.
kind of constructed place. And maybe these others don't necessarily fit in like a constructed place that's utilized by the general public. So I don't know if there are tiers of related or unrelated.
I feel that there are, because really, when you look at planning and urban planning and design and city and regional planning, those are really more policy-based professions. They're not dealing necessarily with figuring out the built space and what the built space is composed of. It's your building materials, spatial sequences, things like that. And while they're definitely related, I don't know that you can sit an urban planner down and have that person design a park with the constructor.
But just to interject on that,
The only thing that I would offer that urban planning, I would think, would take under its tutelage placemaking, public placemaking.
Yes.
So I think by virtue of that, it qualifies as collateral.
Yeah, I'm not discounting the fact that someone could, with one of those related degrees, work for a landscape architect and certainly absorb and learn how to be a landscape architect in that setting, and then certainly could test and be successful, become licensed doing that. But looking at the degree only and what we think of as those disciplines and what they do outside of landscape architecture, that's why I said
Just as a clarification, I think maybe to set the framework, when we're looking at these degrees, the reason we're looking at these degrees is to determine the amount of collateral knowledge that an individual would receive credit for to be eligible for the exam. Is that correct?
yeah, actually, that's part of your decision to make. But yes, I like that choice of words, collateral knowledge that somebody picks up along the way.
If I could just touch upon framework also.
Yep.
So along with what Pasquale's saying, in terms of overall structure of your decision making, it might be, one approach might be closely related, the two that are articulated, and then somewhat related. And some of these degrees you might decide fit into the box of any degree. So you've got those multiple pathways or boxes in which these might fit. I hope that simplifies it, doesn't make it more complicated.
So that's a good point. Doug, that's a really good one. Do you want to, instead of we had yes here, do we want to do maybe it's related? So maybe where we have the 2 yeses on the suggestion we put, everybody feel that that's related to the core knowledge?
Yes.
All right, and before we take that, I want to make sure. So let's do related there. And then we can do related here. Yeah, sorry. You have eyes in the back of your head. And then we can do yes related, seems similar to urban planning, so we captured that. And then we left off with geography saying, I guess for now, before we take your all's comment, is do we feel that's related or not related? Yeah,
I think it's less related.
that's, okay, for now, can we use the words less related?
Or would that be any degree?
Potentially, any degree.
Okay, so when we do less related, can we do comment any degree, potentially any degree? All right, we have 4 public comments, so before we go to public comment, is there any other board member, or sorry, committee member comments related to the And are your also comments related to geography only?
I need to make a clarification that, in the notes. So, first off, you captured my comment about wanting to preserve educational requirements, and that's not what I said. What I said, I actually prefer that there be an experienced pathway, but if educational requirements are preserved, then I would say to consider educational coursework. The other thing is that one of the types of studies that he mentioned was environmental design, and that did not make the list. So that needs to be added to the bullet list of coursework.
Thank you.
What was the?
So environmental design, kind of after it, maybe environmental horticulture or somewhere in between. All right, then, so maybe we can finish out going through this. Does anybody have anything related to the geography part?
I do. Just to defend
remember
my
also
degree, I would just like to say that in California, many of the landscape architecture departments are housed within the geography department. They are related disciplines. Many of the professors teach the same classes. The core of geography is spatial analysis, the relationship between the built space and the natural environment and all the planning issues that go with it.
So,
Can you clarify which departments are in the geography departments?
Well, when I went to UC Davis, the landscape architecture department was underneath the geography department. I know that since changed. Now it's in environmental, it's escaping my mind, but I just wanted to put it up.
Okay.
There is a relationship between the disciplines.
It's not currently at UC Davis under geography department, just to clarify that.
Tracy?
And I would just like to offer, because I'm not a subject matter expert, licensee, when I look for relationships, I go back to attachment E5 and E6 where it has the actual exam plan, because that tells me what the critical aspects of the profession are that are being tested. So I would look at that and then I go, okay, well, if I saw an exam plan for geography, would I see similar types of things? And then that would help me with the degree of relatedness. So, I mean, you know your profession, but these are really the key things that I think would be important to consider.
And, yeah, is that related to geography or the previous comment?
The background.
Hmm?
To background and degrees. Related to backgrounds and degrees.
We need to.
Related to background and degrees.
Oh, related to backgrounds and degrees. So on the previous slide. So do we want to hit, are we good with hearing the related backgrounds, or do you want to finish up?
Well, I wanted to piggyback off of what Tracy mentioned and also pointing out that attachment 7 in the book, we just wanted to bring forward the curriculum that's specified specifically under the National Architectural Accrediting Board, NAB, and then the Accrediting Board for Engineering and Technology, that's for civil engineering, just because we wanted to, since they're frequently mentioned, and also because we thought, here's something that's pretty static and pretty valid in showing that, this is the core curriculum, that's something that can improve relatedness maybe more easily than others. So that was one thing that we wanted.
Yeah.
And just to build off of that, in prior historic discussions about degrees and maybe closely related versus maybe related, that was certainly one of the criteria that was used, whether there's formal national accreditation standards like you have for architecture and engineering, because there are a number of those, maybe most of them you do not. So that might help draw that bright line if necessary for the subcommittee.
I think just to keep us on track, if you're okay, Mark, do we want to finish off these degrees, see where they land, and then hear the comments related to?
I think that's an excellent idea.
All right,
Let's work through it.
All right. So on the environmental studies, kind of what we're trying to, is it related based on the information that Tracy and Brandon are looking at that? You feel like that curriculum is related, somewhat related, or maybe could be classified as just an unrelated degree? That's clear. So what are your thoughts on environmental studies? Yeah.
I think it's similar to geography in a lot of ways. I mean, but maybe a little bit more like, I'm not sure.
Okay. Anybody on the committee have it?
No, I think it's somewhat like,
Okay. So very similar. All right. I think what we might end up coming up with, we're going to have degrees that are, yes, we all agree are related, kind of in the middle, and perhaps not related. Yeah.
I would ask the committee to consider that environmental studies, design, horticulture are somewhat in a package. And for me, they're related because I think only one aspect of environmental design or horticulture is biomimicry, which is applicable to architectural design and landscape architecture. So that's just something I would offer.
So do you all feel similar that environmental design and horticulture can go with what we've been saying about environmental studies? Good. Yeah?
I'm not sure. I think environmental design is maybe related to moving more towards urban planning design or city regional planning, potentially to geography. I don't know. But I guess I'm not sure. I mean, environmental horticulture is a kind of different focus.
Okay. All right. Everybody feel on environmental design, feel it's related more towards, everybody agree with that, or everybody have a dissenting? And is your comment about these two, the environmental part?
Yes.
All right, yeah.
I just want to be sure that there's an inclusion of environmental restoration science, ecological management and restoration.
Or actually, let's go. So you're adding a few more degrees to
Well,
this part.
I think they might fall under the environmental degrees and watershed sciences. I just want to be sure they get packed in there somewhere.
Okay, so can we put a few more spaces in between and we'll add?
are those degrees of subject matter?
Oh, that's a good point. So,
They're degrees. Yeah, I just looked up a few of them.
all right, so can you read those more slowly just so we can?
Yes.
Or do you want me to, or do you have them written down and I can?
Yeah, well, watershed
Go.
sciences,
Watershed sciences, all right.
environmental restoration science, ecological management and restoration.
Okay. And then
Thanks.
for the committee,
So look, ecological management, I think is what you said.
Yeah.
did you say ecological management and science?
I said
Make sure we get it right.
watershed sciences, environmental restoration science, and ecological management and restoration.
Okay, so management and restoration. Okay, we got that. Thanks.
Thank you.
So for the committee, you feel environmental studies captures this, or are these separate that you want to say related, maybe not as related?
Well, I think those are all a subset of environmental studies.
So they're in the family of the environment, in the environmental studies family. Okay. So then we can say that what that these are, like, so we capture. Sometimes we'll capture notes so that we can get that back to the committee when we type up the summary. All right. So we have environmental studies, which captures these three, which is similar, somewhat related, which we'll find out where. We have environmental design, which is related to urban design and planning. And then someone said that horticulture is kind of a different focus, maybe a different animal. Do I say that's a related degree or unrelated degree? We do have a section for unrelated degrees coming up, so we can put some of those in there. Yeah.
My experience, I have a degree in ornamental horticulture, and it covered lots of bases, including design, landscape design. So I guess it depends on who offers the degree and what they include in the educational experience. But,
With the data that Tracy referenced, help put that in the category. So are we thinking, so you're saying maybe it isn't a different focus? And maybe it's more related but not as related, like that middle ground?
yeah, I don't know that it's necessarily separate. It may be, but
So can we put, where it says different focus, can we put different focus slash maybe somewhat related, like we did earlier? So we're somewhere in that genre. Yeah.
I guess I'll just offer one more time for the committee. If we get maybe encapsulate environmental science, design, environmental studies, design and sciences as a related degrees. Oh, because we'll be chasing degrees all day long if we try to break it down. To this.
I think that is a great, yeah, if we can maybe keep it in the same family, we'd probably,
Because what we're trying to do here is set the frameworks. If an individual has a related degree in this area, they receive a certain amount of credit for their education. So I think if we kind of make it a big picture.
Makes sense.
and then you have a comment too?
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, as it pertains to environmental horticulture.
Okay, so now a good time to share the environmental.
So my opinion, but you talked about design in the horticulture major, it's basically planting design. It's not site design, and it's not urban design, and it's not a more broad look at design. It's really about the planting design. Am I correct?
Well, not my education. It was taught by a landscape architect in the School of Ag, and it covered. I mean, when I studied, it was residential landscape design, but it had hardscape and softscape.
Just carry on our list to make sure we stay on time. We've got parks and natural resource management. Do you feel that's related or not related?
That's related.
All right. Everybody else agree that's related, or everybody have a different idea? Not so, okay. So related. Then we have urban forestry. Somewhat related.
Very somewhat.
Okay, I saw a few wavering head nods, so yeah, there is some nonverbal, somewhat. And then we have landscape planning and design and landscape design. Do we want to put all those two together? Landscape planning
Yeah.
and design. Should we feel that's related, or?
That's landscape architecture.
That's what this is.
All right, so we're gonna.
Unless it's from a community college or a non-4-year program. Yeah.
It's related. So related. All right. Excellent. Thank you, Mark. And then we've got agriculture. Agriculture is related, not related, or somewhere in between.
Any major.
Any major.
Okay, so that goes to any major, any degree, and then community development.
That's also broad and very difficult. I would say any major of that. That would be my. It's somewhat. It's yes, but it depends.
Depends on the curriculum.
Yeah.
Let's put any major slash somewhat. Okay. All right. So then, maybe we can do a little decorating. So we've got. Let's try to. Can you put them on like roughly the same areas? Or the same. So we've got our. Yes, they're definitely related. Seems to be total agreement. And then it seems like on environmental studies, actually in the rest. Oh, I like your idea.
So all the yes related versus.
They're not, yeah. And these are all actually. Yeah, I agree. All right, so did we, actually, can we go to the next slide? So everybody's on the same page that these would definitely be related degrees that we would consider.
Yes.
So we've got 6 degrees that we consider. And if we can go back on the slide. On these are the ones that we thought were potentially in some way related. Do we want to separate it? Do we want to see if we can squeeze these into related, or do we want to just leave these as, all right, I
I personally would like to have a separate category
Okay, so,
somewhat.
so then these are, so can we go back to the previous one? Can we put, somewhat, like where it says suggested degrees, can we just put somewhat related degrees? This way we'll remember. So then, what we were planning to do on the next slide is taking those degrees that are related, we're gonna ask you all how much experience, or I'm sorry, how much education is needed in that degree. Do we wanna just focus on only those related degrees, and we'll come back to these later in the day to figure out what that education requirement might be? Sure. Okay. There's a couple different ways we can go about it, so let's look at the related degrees again. These are the 7. I can't count. 7. These are the 7 related degrees that we're talking about. The next part of the equation is how much education should somebody have in these degree types?
You mean credit towards the requirements?
Yeah. How many years of credit?
Okay.
Yeah, how many years credit? So one thing we thought about doing, so taking up on my offer, everybody might have a different opinion on the number of years. So for the committee members, I was going to hand out a card, and you could just write like 4 years / and then the experience, the training, the experience under a landscape architect. Does that make sense? Similar to what we did before? Yeah.
We're assuming that we're holding at 6 years total experience and education, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So the idea is between education and experience, we'd be around 6 years, or be at 6 years. I see public comment hands, so yeah. Anything related to the related degrees?
I would like the committee to consider something, that there are many pathways to make an excellent and very capable landscape architect. And my belief is founded on the fact that in 1985, the American Society of Landscape Architects bestowed on Roberto Bolaños its highest award, the ASLA Medal for Superior Landscape Architecture Design. Roberto was trained as an artist and never as a landscape architect. He was a self-taught horticulturist and worked until the end of his life to protect and promote the threatened flora of his native country, and he started the idea of sustainability. His work transcended the boundaries of the narrow discipline and brought world renown for the professional landscape architecture, when he was never trained as one. So just consider that experience sometimes, and people that are really determined to learn
And
can
we,
become.
we do have an experience-only pathway that we'll be talking about later. So that may, some of that may come up now, but it also may come up in the other areas as well. So one more comment.
I just want to circle back to the 6 years being a total requirement. I personally believe that for these new additional pathways that you're considering, that they should be on an 8-year scale, matching the California Architects Board's precedent.
So that's something for the committee to consider.
I don't know if we're considering that right now. I am concerned about barriers, pathways to licensure, so increasing the number of years
That's a good point.
concerns me.
Increasing the number of years could be perceived or be an
As a-
actual
as a
barrier
barrier.
to entry. That's a good point.
Yes, but when you look at those other degrees, is 6 years really going to do it? If it takes you 4 years to get a bachelor's of science or arts in one of those degrees, and then 2 years of presumably working for a landscape architect, would that be
But you're making the
sufficient?
assumption that you're giving 4 years of credit for those other degrees. And we're going to talk about how much credit we're giving to the other degrees.
But,
Notably, the current pathway is an architecture degree, which I understand can take up to 5 years.
Yes.
Is only allocated 1 year of
1 year.
education credit and then 5 years of experience credit.
Okay, okay.
all right, so keep in mind, these cards here, we're not voting on anything. We just wanted, instead of going around everybody sharing their opinions, we thought we'd collect all the opinions. We're going to write them up on the next slide. And can we go to the next slide so we can make sure everybody's on the same page? So this is just, there are 5 committee members. You're going to put the number of years, or if you think it's less than a year, it could be months of education credit based on the related degrees we just talked about, and then the training experience under a landscape architect. Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to be clear, years of education don't necessarily extend to amount of credit.
Right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
which one are we writing down?
You're writing down credit.
Maybe it would be good, Dennis, if they looked again at the cylinder chart to see what we currently give credit for
Right
in
on.
comparison to what you're trying to come up with for the related.
So this is the one we're talking about, related bachelor's length, and then this is the chart Vicki just pointed out. Thanks, Vicki.
Clarification request?
Yeah.
On the second cylinder on the left group, the non-lab accredited, that means a landscape degree, but it's not lab accredited? Is that what that means?
Yes.
Okay.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the undergraduate degree at UC Berkeley
Right.
would fit into that category.
Are we all clear? Does it sound?
Yeah, so just to be clear, so if we're to do this out of 6 and not out of some other number.
Exactly. I would like to do this out of 6. I think the experience, fellow experience is a whole separate conversation at this point to me. You guys know?
Okay. Education out of 6 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like the committee is thinking education on 6 years now.
So on the card, we're going to write education credit on one side.
Yep.
And training experience on the other side to equal 6.
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody in agreement with that? And when Mark says one side, just to keep it, if you want to draw a line, left and right side, instead of this, that would be great. And make it, yeah, make sure you label what it is so we don't make mistakes. There's a lot of words.
Exactly.
There you go, Mark. You're free to get to the purchase.
For consistency, the two headers, the one on the left is related.
Whatever you write, however you write it. So yeah, related degrees is what we're,
Related degrees and then credit.
yes.
Related 4-year bachelor's degree.
So you should have
Noted on the slide.
years of education and then years of training experience.
I mean, really, if our
Equals 6.
framework is 6 years, we just need to know how much education credit we're writing.
Yes, that's true. But I just wanted people to think,
Yeah.
like, when they write down that number, they're like, yes, that's what our, I'm like, yeah, that's all true. Tally them up, see where we fall. and then- So that's where the challenge might come. We're going to be probably all over the map.
So far.
And if we're all over the map, as a committee, you need to come up with something that you feel that works, that would be a recommendation, the subcommittee, that would be a recommendation for the committee. So we look here, we've got between 1 and 3 years of education credit. We've got between 3 and 5 years of actual experience. And so the question for you all to consider, and keep in mind this is a recommendation for the LATC to consider, is what do you recommend now that we're between 1 and 3. So as a committee, you 5 need to come up to what number can you all agree with? It's not fair or reasonable, protects the consumer, but doesn't create a barrier to licensure.
It just looks like the 3 guys trump card.
That's me. I was the 3 big guy. I'm comfortable going 2-4, quite frankly, but I think 1-5, an architectural degree, there's a lot there that directly relates to what we do as landscape architects, in my opinion. And I think that it's,
But currently, we only give them 1.
to me, that's a shame, and I think it needs to be elevated. So by that definition, the related degrees to me need to at least be 2 years of credit because of how much is packed in there that really pertains to what we do as landscape architects. So that's my opinion.
Suggestion is that you would modify what's currently in place.
Yes, yeah. I was a 3-3 person, and so I'm comfortable with the 2-4. I'm not comfortable with the 1-5.
Okay, so if we, can we put in parentheses 2 there, just so that we know that 2 would be considered.
Or 3/.
So then we have 3 2s. Yeah.
And having just heard that we're willing to look at modifying the existing criteria, where that architecture could be only this 1 year, I would change that to 2-4 as well.
Okay. And which one, were you were
Bottom
one?
one, yeah.
So we'll choose any one of the ones. So with that, we have 4 subcommittee members who are thinking 2 years works. Does everybody, is there anyone who would disagree with us coming up with a recommendation to LATC being 2 and 4? Is there anybody who would disagree with that?
I was the other 1-5.
Okay. And how do you feel about the 2-4 if it were to go that way?
Yeah, I think, I looked at it kind of in the same framework in terms of the 1-5 as, thinking of kind of what the existing architectural, credit is, but, yeah, so that's sort of where, that was kind of my frame of mind, and I guess I'm not sure, I hadn't thought about architecture yet, and kind of thinking of it as being, worth more credit yet, so that's kind of where
So are you comfortable with the 2-4 layout, or are you like
hesitant, but, if everybody else feels.
But you can live with it.
I could live with it.
and knowing that you don't feel like it would unduly burden licensure barrier, or it would still be fair to consumers?
And it's my assumption that in this action, we're going to change that NAAB architecture credit cylinder. We're going to take that out, and it's going to fall now into a related degree, and we'll get 2 years of credit. That's my assumption.
Makes sense.
With this action.
It's a fair assessment, I think.
All right, are we good with 2-4, or can we go back to that?
Yes.
Where do we go? Can we put a 2 and a 4 there, so we visually see it, register with the brain? Yeah.
I'd love to hear public comment on this.
All right. Actually, you haven't spoken, so even though you had your hand up first, can you speak just
Sure.
Thank you, I appreciate it. You have landscape design, but I didn't see the words landscape architecture. And are you keeping that as a 4-year and a 2-year? That was my question, because landscape design was there, but I didn't see landscape architecture on your list of degrees.
Yes, the current landscape architecture pathways will stay as is. This is considering the new proposed related degrees pathway.
Okay.
So these are degrees related to the.
Great, thank you.
So if we pop back up there, so we 2 and 4, and if we go one slide up, I think it is, these are the related degrees. Oh yeah, these are the related degrees we're talking about. We're good? Oh, I'm sorry, that was rude of me. Hello. Yeah, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to pose the question that shouldn't an extension certificate, which is currently worth 2 years, be worth more than a related degree?
So, question is, should extensions, oh, 14.
Is it important to note that an extension certificate in combination with a 4-year degree is worth 4 years of credit? The most candidates have both.
So you said a 2-year extension certificate in combination with a 4-year degree is worth 4 years of credit?
Correct.
You guys hear that? Yeah, it's louder.
A two-year extension certificate in landscape architecture in combination with any 4-year degree. Candidates with that pathway are granted 4 years of credit toward the 6-year requirement.
Okay.
Most individuals have both because the 4-year degree is a requirement for entrance into the program. They do have some other ways to get into the program with experience only, but it's not very common.
You had a comment? Sorry about this. Comment.
So, I have been seeking reciprocity in everything I, right? I passed the UNE, Uniform National Exam. And I'm concerned about the fact that if you are going to say that you've got to have a certain amount of education requirement, that the people that have already demonstrated competence through passing of an exam will be excluded. So that's my concern.
So, that's something that I think we should take under a separate
I agree.
discussion, because that is a valid point.
Right.
But if we're just looking at people rather freshly graduated and rather freshly joining the profession, if you will, then I think that this is a reasonable time to have that discussion, but this is a whole nother
I agree
topic.
100% with that. I think that's a separate, that we need to discuss.
Right, so a separate agenda item on
Or even today, maybe it gets talked about today. I don't know if that's the time for that.
maybe not. We can see, why don't we see where we end up at the end of the
I
day.
think it definitely needs to be discussed,
Okay.
or additional.
So with that, yeah, quick question. What is, so for, in California for architecture for a related degree, what's the credit? Is it two and 4?
2
2 out of 8.
So I just asked a
Yeah.
question.
So a quarter of our 6 would be a year and a half. You're gonna take that goes up.
So are we good with related bachelor's degrees?
Dennis, are you, with the related degree types,
Yep.
the other list, are you then going to move forward like that's what they agreed as being allowed? Because I think maybe some more discussion needs to be made on those degrees. Are they universal depending upon the school? Are we always going to then accept it? I mean, is it defined enough to where we're comfortable with giving, say, 2 years educational credit for any school in the U.S. that labels it that when we receive an application? I think that's what we need to just double check that we're all on the same page.
So that's a great point for the committee to consider. Is any school in the United States who gives somebody a degree, 4-year degree, or I'm sorry, a bachelor's degree in this, we're good saying that counts.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with that.
I'm not.
I'm good with it.
See, that's why I want to make sure.
So we have some
Because that's what
uncomfortables
you're
and some-
doing, is you're saying those relate, all those are related, and now you agree to 2 years credit regardless of the degree and where it came from.
And that was kind of my point earlier, that you don't have that comfort level, those other degrees might fall into the box for any degree.
Yeah. So for these here, I see your point, but for these here, if everybody's in agreement, the 2, 4, what we had, and then those other degrees that we hadn't really talked about, so like we're gonna move those to just, that would be any degree, that would be in the any degree pile.
I just want to make sure they're comfortable with that list going forward. It sounded like we were going to move on, right?
Yeah, we were, so no, you're right on that.
Sorry, but I
You were
just
right
want to
on
make
that.
sure that you understand that that's how we would implement that.
And is everybody in agreement or not agreement with that?
It sounds like we're not.
I think it's, pardon the analogy, but it's maybe a little bit half-baked, because we could never describe or identify the coursework across the country. But what you can look to is the student performance criteria of the lab accredited degrees, and then have a portfolio review so that the candidate can demonstrate that the conformance of their education is in line with the accredited degrees. So they receive credit. If they have an architecture degree, they can submit a portfolio that addresses the key categories of the education component. And that's demonstrated in their portfolio, or civil engineering, or any one of those. Just to satisfy the question is whether the degree is worthy enough to be considered a related degree. But that's like creating another step
Right.
that doesn't exist right now. Because if you try to identify coursework, I mean, you might as well make this meeting for the rest of the year.
Right.
That's true.
So then the question for the committee is, some future time, do you want to break out what the coursework would be, which would be a huge undertaking, but maybe it's necessary? Yeah.
Well, I was just going to add from the architect's perspective, when we do evaluations on related degrees, we're not looking at the coursework, we're looking at specifically the title of the degree. So it has to be an urban planning and design degree. And it doesn't matter the course curriculum behind it. Because it can vary from school to school, and we have to keep up to date on that at all times.
Which could be an undertaking.
Correct, plus it's in the regs, and so we'd have to change that every time there was a change at the school. Suddenly, we would end up with Swiss cheese as far as what schools we could accept it from and what schools we couldn't.
Steve has a
Yeah, just a comment. The challenge is the name of the degrees. And schools name their degrees in varying ways. And in fact, the degree I have is not the name of the degree anymore. They've changed it. So that creates another problem.
All right. So,
yeah, I guess, the other thing, kind of, I think where this kind of breaks, maybe there's a break here, is with architecture, civil engineering, and with those two degrees, you have an accrediting body, which helps to ensure a uniformity and the curriculum, and so you don't have that problem with the name. So that maybe there really does need to be a break at architecture and civil engineering as the related degrees, because you can assure that they are related, and then these others as somewhat related and non-verifiable.
if we do other related, that would just be lumped into the big related category. So just recognize with that,
maybe that moves everything else into the
written
non-related.
Non-related degrees, and that, yeah.
I think the only way you could, practical way you would ever get there would be to have an evaluation of the degrees. And rather than 2 and 4, rather than the 2 years of credit, the maximum of 2 years. So upon evaluation of the degree, maybe they only get 1 year.
So that would be evaluating each degree for each applicant.
Everyone who submits a related degree.
And we might fall into the area where it's subjective and not, credit. The other thing too, on your point to consider, architecture and civil engineer, there is an accrediting body. We also accept, like for architects, non-accredited in the same degree path. So accredited might get more credit, and then non-accredited get less.
I was going to comment about that. If we're going this route, the architecture and civil engineer degrees that are NAAB or ABET, program would be at one level, and then the others would be at a different level.
That's what I'm suggesting.
And if that's the case, then I would suggest that we rethink about the credit experience rather than 2 years. Possibly think 3 years.
Mark, having said that, I almost want to go back to my 1 and 5.
Yeah.
For related degrees, just one year related degrees, and that's kind of it. And then you have to make up the difference in
Experience.
Yeah.
Would you consider 2 years for the accredited architecture and engineering degree?
Yeah, I'm not swaying away from the NAB accredited degree, because I think that's worth 2 years.
There's value,
Yeah, but the related degrees, I think 1 and 5, and it's an education. It's worth something.
Do you all want to do something like for accredited programs? And then here's what I'm thinking. Tell me if I'm way off base. For those the civil engineering and the architecture they're accredited programs. The others may not have an accredited program now. Could you do something like there'd be 2 years, and if it's an accredited program of any of those degrees, which we know those two are, and then it could be a different education requirement for if it's a non-accredited program? Does that make
Then we're
sense?
just potentially lumping them into other related.
True, but it could be that middle ground, because when we get to
Right.
non-related, maybe that's a different requirement altogether, so maybe there's a middle ground. Something to consider. If that's,
Nathan, what do you guys think?
I guess I think if it was the accredited program set to two education credits and non-accredited and kind of in this category as one.
That's kind of how I went back.
John?
I'm still okay with the two.
For accredited or for any of the related programs?
Just for the accredited.
Okay.
So kind of thinking for the non-accredited programs, so those remaining 5, I think it was. Did you want to come up, do you want to do the cards thing again where we were talking about, so we're still accredited programs 2 and 4, the non-accredited, but those 5 degrees. Did you want to come up with the cards and maybe put a year requirement for that?
I don't know if we need cards. I heard 1-5.
Okay, that would be 1-5.
I think there's kind of
A unit, okay.
Steve, do you have any?
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Okay, good.
So then on the 2, on the 2 and 4, can we put like in parentheses accredited, and then we'll do 1 and 5 non-accredited? Break foot a little. Yeah. Oh, I see what you did. Yeah, okay. So thanks, Vicki, for bringing that up. No, this is good. This is what we're here to do. So it's good. All right. So how do we feel about this then? Those 5 remaining degrees would be a 2 and a 4, and the ones that are accredited would be 1.
I'd love to hear from the public really quick on this.
Okay. Yeah. Any public comment regarding?
I'm in total agreement with what you're proposing. I would just clarify that accredited is ABET and LAAB, and that non-accredited is really accredited, but it's like one of the various accreditation bodies for universities.
So you're saying
right?
non-lab or
well, I'm just
ABET accredited.
curious,
Is that what
because
you
to
all-
me that's how I interpret it.
That's a good point. I don't know.
Because you could get a degree from, the Caribbean, it wouldn't be accredited.
In this category, we are recognizing NAAB and ABET
Okay.
as 2 accreditation bodies for civil engineering and/or architecture.
Okay. All right. That makes sense.
That's what
Yes,
we're
that's correct.
recognizing.
Yes.
Do you want it that prescriptive then, so that if it comes out later,
I
there's
think
another accredited
there's a
body?
question about that and a
Yeah.
clarification. I believe, yes, we do want it that prescriptive.
And does everyone else agree that that's how you want those 2 accrediting bodies or the accrediting bodies? If they were to happen to do those other 5, then we would add that on to that, if that were to happen.
Yeah.
Actually.
So-
And then, oh, go ahead. And then,
Sir? I'm sorry,
Oh.
is the subcommittee saying NAAB?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, and then public comment was LAAB and ABET?
That was my mistake.
That's a separate,
Yeah,
for a
I
separate
shouldn't have said
category.
that.
I think you just.
I meant
NAAB.
NAAB.
And then
okay.
it's ABET also, NAB and ABET.
All right, cool. And then you got a comment?
Okay, so I will admit that I have very unique circumstances. And as part of my qualifying for licensure in Washington State, I was granted 1 year of educational experience and 6 years of work experience. My educational experience came from a Bachelor of Arts degree from a progressive liberal arts college, and my area of specialty, they give majors. I have an area of specialty that is environmental design. So I'm not quite sure how that falls into here, but I'm of course very concerned of getting knocked out by, a mere title. And, so I would request, that's why I'm saying you need to look at coursework and consider the body of the education that's received.
Based on those comments, anybody have? I'm sorry, there's one more. Yeah?
I'm just looking for a clarification. Are you saying that an NAAB or an ABET degree would qualify for 2 years of education experience? Is that correct? And then that would be a higher standard, and then anything below that would be a non-accredited. So that means for an engineering degree that is non-accredited,
We haven't actually gotten there.
is that,
Actually,
Yes, it would be the one.
I kind of think we're setting the bar. So I'm sort of when I look at the associate degree 1-year credit in the current regulation, I just feel like an engineering degree is a higher level, whether it's accredited or not. And so I'm just hoping that by lowering that bar, we don't end up needing to push down the rest of them. What's that?
We don't fall off the bottom.
Yeah, we don't fall off the bottom. We don't go down to, -1.
Vicky has a.
I think, Dennis, what might happen as you're facilitating this session, when the subcommittee gets to that point, they might want to then readjust
Yeah.
what they came up with previously, as it all falls into place.
And so-
Because it might not seem equitable
We have a-
when you look at what we currently.
We have a final slide, so we're gonna end up at one point sending you on a 5-minute break, but we're gonna take everything that you've come up with, put it on one slide so you can see that comparison, so.
Thank you.
All right, with that, how are we feeling? Are we good? Ready to move on to the next area?
Yeah.
All right, so the next area is similar to what we talked about, related to degrees, but we're talking to associate degree. Let me have you read this, and then we'll talk about it now.
I'm sorry. Did we cover the non-related? Were you getting?
I thought those were, the non-related, we have a whole separate non-related degree category, and I thought we could bring those over then.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so when we get to non-related degrees, we'll bring it under there. So, this is what we're talking about, essentially the same thing, but we're talking a 2-year curriculum. Did you want to bring over those 7 that we kind of agreed, or do we need to do it? No, okay.
No, it's a 2-year curriculum in landscape architecture.
Okay. All right, so with that, everybody capture this. So do you want to go where we can describe what degree types are we talking about? Do you want to start from scratch, or do you want to talk?
Oh, I see what you're saying. These are related degrees.
But
In an associate.
Yeah, so if you look at attachment E1, for an associate degree in landscape architecture, it's currently allocated 1 year of education credit, 5 years of experience credit. I took a couple of notes, highlights. The board offers 1 year for a related associate degree as an 8-year requirement. With respect to the chart 8.3 and what other states provide, we have 4 states that provide such credit. Notably, the only one that offers that we provide an actual amount was Montana, which provides us 6 years of experience. CLAR's model regulations did not include anything with regard to associate's degrees, but they did, as we mentioned earlier, do a 4-year degree. And then also just for a general kind of snapshot of what kind of analytical skills someone takes away with an associate degree, we have as attachment 8, kind of general associate degree requirements to offer. With an associate degree, a student would take away general analytical skills, writing skills, so on and so forth, if that helps your consideration. So those are some materials you can reference for this section of
One additional point, a conclusion of the subcommittee could be the experience-only pathway, assuming we are filling in that box, might be an appropriate pathway for some of these choices. It may be that you don't define credit for certain degree types like any associate. It's possible, I'm not recommending it, but I'm just kind of putting that out there as a thought.
Well, I'm comfortable. You asked the question, shall we move over degrees that we had identified, in a bachelor or undergraduate, move it over to the associate? I'm comfortable doing that if this group is comfortable.
So the other remaining 4 committee members feel like those 7 degree types we could copy and paste here.
To start our discussion.
Yeah.
That's good.
Okay, so let's go borrow those. Thinking from an associate degree level education, is there anything else we need to add, something that we can take away?
Can you really get associate's degrees on this?
Our associate degree programs, do they exist in the United States? There's some of these.
For sure.
Yes.
Since we're probably gonna go here and then kind of go back and readjust and then bump everybody else up correctly, I think this is simply associate degrees. This, it still has the qualifier related, right?
Yes.
So does this mean that associate degrees which are not listed as related will receive no credit?
Yes.
Yeah.
Because by virtue of that, we're saying that 2 years of education doesn't count.
As it relates to sitting for a landscape architecture license in the state of California.
Our next two sections will be unrelated factors.
And maybe that's okay to say that, but it's already saying that.
Yeah, it would be unrelated.
Yeah, right? It will be unrelated.
It's sort of being done in
Would you restate what the research showed for the other states for this again?
Sure, we have on attachment E.3, 4 states that identified related associate degrees. Notably, 3 of those 4 kind of many instances that we encounter is a lot of states, it's under board review where that candidate would take their education experience to the board and the board make that determination. So 3 of those 4 have a kind of a yes, we allow it, but the caveat is that would go before the board for consideration. Montana was the only one that we found that actually stipulates an amount where in addition to that 2-year AA degree, they would ask for 6 years of experience. So assumedly that's under an 8-year requirement. We can verify that, but that's what we found there.
So most states did not allow any credit for a related 2-year degree. We currently allow 1 year for a landscape architecture and associate degree. That would be safe, right?
Yes.
And is it safe to state that the state of California discourages a board review component because it is hard to quantify that? Is that a safe
Very
statement?
accurate. You have to have
Okay.
exceedingly detailed regulations specifying what you could actually grant credit for, and that literally may not be feasible given the variety of flavors of degrees.
That was my understanding. I just wanted to make sure that's really on the
And
table.
it's possible, because we found this quite a bit in the research that Courtney did for us. A lot of the states that do have the board review component of it, they may not have as strict regulations or requirements as California does for developing that criteria for it. So it really have to be justified and be defensible regulations to have that.
So based on that discussion, do we feel like these, we do need to come up with requirements, or do we feel like we can follow the other, 47 states and what they do? What are your thoughts as committee members?
So the other 47 states basically don't give credit.
Yeah, if I understand it right, the other 47 states, I can have a 2-year degree in these or whatever, and it doesn't count. I need the experience.
Pasquale, a 2-year associate's degree in architecture.
Yes.
How do you think that prepares someone if they want to go into landscape architecture? There's value to that, would you say?
I'm thinking back. And I don't know that it's nearly as robust as a NAB accredited degree in architecture that relates to landscape architecture.
Right.
I would think that the only thing that qualifies on this associate consideration would be an associate's degree in landscape planning and design or landscape design. I think those would be, and that's where you draw the line. Because you have to draw the line somewhere. I think that's where you would draw the line on associate degrees.
So I'm feeling very much the same way. Landscape architecture, landscape design, or landscape planning and design. That there's something really of value to give credit for.
That associate degree will create the platform or the jumping off point for someone to enter into the career of landscape architecture and acquire the knowledge through experience from that kickoff.
Thank you.
Just to make sure that I captured it, don't delete either. So we're saying we could delete these, we would remove these, and then these would be the 3 associate degree types that are related to landscape architecture that we consider.
I'm proposing that the subcommittee considers that, yes.
So how do you all?
I would be okay with that.
So we have 2 okay. Doug, you look like you were thinking.
Don't sound
You're
so
not allowed to
surprised.
do that.
No, I'm fine. I was just considering related versus landscape architecture.
And then,
Oh, I see.
I don't know your name. What's your name?
Marcus,
Marcus. Yeah.
if it helps inform the subcommittee on how to go with the 2 years, the board offers any technical school certificate or field related to architecture 1 year, but any other community college degree that has at least a 2-year curriculum, we give them half that time or 6 months.
But that's out of 8.
That's out of 8 years.
And I think Doug brought up a good point. We're defining landscape architecture. We already have a landscape
It's already
architecture associate path. So I guess what I'm saying is if it's not that, it's no credit.
Okay, so one consideration is, thank you for putting all that. It doesn't matter if it's any of these, because we've already got these 3, because these 2 covered. We don't have these covered.
And I think we may have to define the landscape design or landscape planning design in that current pathway. I don't know off the top of my head if it says landscape architecture specific for the associate.
It does.
It does, okay. So,
And you have to decide if you want to give, say, landscape planning and landscape design the same amount of credit as a landscape architecture should.
in an associate's component, I would say yes, that's my proposal.
I would agree because it's really, again, it's the jumping off point for acquiring the knowledge through experience.
Steve, did you have something?
Yeah, I'm still not seeing the difference between those 2 lots. Landscape planning design and landscape design, is that redundant?
Oh, that's for you all to decide. Okay,
Yeah,
that's
keep it simple.
So then you're saying we could, everybody sounds like we could get rid of this last one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that. And then the kind of the gray area, or maybe it's not so gray anymore, is these would just go under other degrees or just not be counted at all. And there's also a proposal maybe half a year, 6 months.
No credit.
No, so we're thinking, does everybody feel that way? No credit on these?
I'd love to hear from the public.
Public comment, thoughts? No credit for those highlighted ones?
In an associate degree, 2-year associate.
Thanks, thanks for that.
I'm fine with that.
So we hear fine. Any other, I see a few head nods, but we're good?
Given that we're going to have an experience-only pathway.
Yeah, sure, coming up. Yeah.
That's the hard part, is not knowing where the conversation on the non-related degree.
Well, we'll do that, and then remember,
Get to
we're gonna
go
have the
back at the
summary.
end.
Yeah, we gotta go back.
We'll have the summary, yeah, there's no reason why we can't go back. Yeah, Vicki.
So you just deleted landscape design at the bottom. So if Courtney receives an application with a 2-year degree in landscape design, will it have to say planning and design to give credit, or will it be acceptable if it just said landscape design?
Or you could change and or.
Just
Yeah, and or.
And then we have a public comment about, yeah.
Some of the community college programs have changed the names of their programs to environmental design. So just putting that out there. And they functionally are
Thank you.
design.
So if you all want to do
Yeah.
landscape and or environmental planning and or design. Or you could break it out. I mean, you could break it out.
I think I prefer to have a separate environmental design.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with that.
So if we can just, yeah.
You guys don't exactly know what you're seeing these titles, specifically.
Exactly, but we're gonna get it by everything.
Can you really, or can you delete the,
That's why I'm trying to help clarify it for staff.
Should it say environmental planning and or design to be, does that matter? No? Okay.
Environmental design.
And then we're saying we're striking out these guys. I see a hand up.
My degree was called Parks and Grounds Management, and I learned landscape design, I learned horticulture, I learned, so I don't know if we are sticking with names, might as well put Parks and Grounds.
All right, so her degree,
Was that a 2-year associate degree?
2 years.
Okay.
Parks and Grounds Associate degree. So it's for the committee to decide, is that another pathway?
We don't know what that curriculum
Yeah.
It's a
sounds like
question.
it could be groundskeeping,
Yeah.
but it probably isn't.
We're kind of in the same threshold to what with the 4-year degree. Came up with the conceptual and there are variable names.
But with the 4-year degree, we can make the split because there was an accrediting body,
Right.
and here
There
is
isn't.
a way to accredit.
The split might be a 2-year associate's degree in, say, landscape architecture and environmental design, and then a lesser amount of credit for just an associate's degree.
Although
Anything.
we do have an unrelated
Yes,
associate's
yes.
degree coming up. So maybe, are you all thinking maybe that's where that would go, or we have, or you have one more, is it related to, did you want to?
Well, I was just maybe, another way of looking at it is all these landscape planning, landscape design, parks and grounds, maybe the committee should think of what is acceptable to have as topics that were covered in those degrees and look at that way. Because names change all the time. They keep changing the names. Sometimes it's
So there was earlier discussion about, does the committee have the feasibility to track the actual courses within each one, and there was kind of a general thought that that would be a monster undertaking for all colleges in the United States. Yeah.
But that could be done through, when you're submitting your application for licensure, you're submitting your transcript. So you're going to see what courses are taking. Now, there's still a subjective process in that, because now you got to decipher, and that may be communication between LATC and the person that's applying to see what exactly was within that process for that individual.
And that was a comment that kind of Doug and Mark hit on, is that the least subjectivity, the more that
Right.
everybody's playing by the same rules. So it's something that we need to.
I'm still at a point where I'd like to move forward with these two. As part of the current associate, we have a cylinder right now for associate degree in landscape architecture, landscape planning, and then adding to that, the landscape planning and or design or environmental design. So those 3 items
I would
are under
agree
that
with that.
existing cylinder.
So we already have an associate's degree in landscape architect pathway that exists. These would be 2 more degrees under the associate's category that are related that we would consider. So then if we go to the next slide, the next step would be how many years are we thinking of credit and experience? And do you want to do the card thing, or you want to shout them out? Which works? You all work?
You can scroll down.
Yeah, all right, let's go. Yeah, you all seem to work well together.
I propose it stays the same as it is, 1 year of educational credit and 5 years of experience.
I agree.
Well, that was, okay, I heard 3 agrees, so anybody not, so let's put 3, then there were 2 people, yeah, 1 and 5. All right, and then we're missing some.
1 and 5.
All right, so everybody's good, 1 and 5?
Yes.
That was easy. Now, your recommendation is how to think. And Brianna, are you thinking something?
Oh, no.
Okay, I thought you were going to say something.
I
You
was
had a
just
pen.
documenting.
You wield the heavy pen. All right, so when it comes to associate degree related, 1 and 5 years, we're good with that? All right, so the next phase is to move to non-related degrees. Do you all need a 10-minute break or anything? If you want a break, that's great. If not, we're a little ahead of schedule, so we've got the time for it, so it'll be great. Right.
Yes.
All right, so
Let's
let's
take a
do,
break.
you're going to be back here 10 minutes?
So we're going to get started again, back in session.
Thank you. So we were thinking, if you all are in agreement, that maybe we skip this section and jump to the experience only, since that is becoming a really hot topic with everyone.
So if we talk about or address first the experience only section, then we can come back and do any unrelated degrees, whether it's bachelor's or associates and stuff like that. Is that okay with
Subcommittee
everyone?
members, you guys good?
Okay.
I'm good with that.
Yeah. I think that's kind of the pivot point.
Yeah. Okay, let's do it.
Nice. So, please take a moment and read the information under experience only before we start our discussion. And it's pretty straightforward.
I got it.
So per the agenda item E cover page, we have on page 2 a synopsis of findings for experience only. But just to give a general overview, as we have referencing the Architects Board of the 8-year required credit, the Architects Board grants 8 years of credit for experience only pathways, so 8 years of experience. The board, as mentioned earlier, does have a structured internship program which helps support that. And as mentioned earlier, the LATC does have on its current strategic plan an objective to advocate to our national body to create its own structured internship program. However, that's not, it's not a definite, it's just something that they want to advocate. Looking at attachment E.3, there are 29 states that offer an experience-only pathway to licensure. That's also shown in attachment E.4. So those were kind of the high points we wanted to point out at the moment. And I'll turn it back over.
Okay. So would anyone like to begin the discussion on the experience only section? Considering that there are 29 other states, what's the subcommittee's thoughts?
On the previous slide, I just want to clarify, it says experience as, and that's experience as a landscape architect, or I just want to be clear on what, because it says experience as, comma, or experience obtained.
What that differentiates is experience as could be as a licensed landscape architect, say in another state, or working under the direct supervision of a licensed landscape.
That's clear, thank you.
I think also maybe I should clarify, add to a point that Rebecca made about the Architects Board. We do have an 8-year experience-only pathway with a structured internship component, but that's not the whole 8 years as a structure. We give, I believe, 3 years credit for the structured internship program when they complete it. They can do it less than that sometimes. But the other 5 years credit could be in different experience categories. It's
So when
not
you
all
say,
structured.
what do you mean when you say structured?
So we have the AXP that Oswald spoke about. It's a structured internship where they have to complete a certain number of hours in specific areas, and it's all documented and it's signed off on, and it's channeled through our national organization, which is
And it's a newer requirement. It's been on the books for about a dozen years, but for decades the board had no structured component, so it's 8 years of experience in architecture.
We have quite a few candidates that are still under the old requirement that it's just 8 years of experience. They were grandfathered in before certain that we require, so we still have candidates in the pipeline that aren't completing that structured internship.
But when we say structured, as an example, 400 hours in construction documents, 120 hours in practice management, so forth and so on to accomplish the 3,740 hours. That's what I find missing in the architectural profession. Because I don't know that you can have an experience only without having that criteria in place. And the truth of the matter is, for someone like in California, for someone who's following the experience-only pathway, the minimum AXP required hours is 3,740, but 8 years is equal to over 16,000 hours of experience. So there's a lot of validity with the experience only. I know some of the individuals in here are experience only. You learn what you learn in school, but you don't really learn it until you get into the profession. That's where you really learn. And so it's, I think, very worthy of a conversation of developing an experience only pathway for landscaping.
I agree 100%, and that's
Setting an example.
the puzzle piece that I'm in my mind trying to figure out, that in the short term, CLARB, Council of Landscape Architects, CLARB isn't going to have something for us, but I would love to have an experience-only pathway, and I'd love to have some kind of guidelines that the board, LATC, the state is comfortable with in that interim, if that makes sense.
I would suggest, because I like to always take the path of least resistance, look at the AXP, make that LXP, and put a C in front of it, and call it California LXP, and then look at the criterion, and then modify the criterion as appropriate to best fit the professional landscape architecture.
That process works for me. I'd love to hear from the other subcommittee members.
And if you have, I don't know if you have online connection, we could pull up the AXP, probably, pictures worth 1,000 words. See what that looks like.
Where do we go?
End card.
Oh. Let's see if we do or not.
It's ncard.org.
Maybe very slow. It's probably loading up. I see it.
The structured program might be something the LATC could work towards. It may not be something that happens in the near future, but there are 29 other states that allow it without any structured program. So you have to be able to defend not having that barrier of not allowing it.
And my comment would be toward the reciprocity issue. If you have an individual that's been practicing safely, competently, they're taking enforcement actions in another state, then to have them come in, would they still have to meet this possible structure? I'm not sure you could say, no, they don't have to, but someone in California would. So I think it might start getting very convoluted.
I think the response to that is that in the AXP, there is an option for what is referred to, we refer to it as the broadly experienced design professional, where an individual doesn't really have to actually document all the hours from their supervisor. They still do, but they can submit a portfolio that demonstrates that they've accomplished that knowledge that's prescribed. So,
the more I think about it, it seems like in the short term, it's going to be really hard to figure out this component. So it's almost like we need to move forward with the ideal that at a date down the road, we're going to have an AXP type program for this, for our state.
or CLX.
Right, CLXP.
Until Clark catches up with you guys.
Yeah.
Or they take it on because we
Or they
already.
take it on, yeah.
Making a request.
They have taken things on that we've suggested in the past, because for them it's the right thing to do.
Because it's going to take time to make it defensible and fair and not be a barrier.
So maybe you walk away from this meeting saying that the next step for the experience-only pathway is to develop that structure, that an individual that has 6 years of experience can document that.
Yeah.
And by the time that does happen, there may be a window then to reevaluate how you have created these new pathways. Are they working for you? Are they not working for you? So then when you do perhaps entertain that type of structured internship, you may make some other changes. That's the nice thing about this whole process is you should be revisiting it periodically. Nothing's ever set in stone. You should always be looking at things, see how it's working for your program. So keeping that in mind, I currently, the committee does not have an experience-only pathway. So the question to the subcommittee first is everyone in agreement, subcommittee in agreement with having a subcommittee, or sorry, a experience-only pathway?
I guess I think the thing about having an experience-only pathway is that, you know, it needs, there needs to be some way to kind of validate the experience, that it's, you know, broad enough, I think, and that it's, it, you know, covers kind of the breadth of what, you know, a landscape architect should know. Somebody who's worked, you know, in one office for some time doing a certain set of particular, you know, part of the profession may not have exposure to, you know, the whole profession, and so I think, you know, that kind of, that's what the
That's what the
AXP
does,
is
yeah.
it sort of
If
enforces that brown
Are we
gap.
not able to pull it up, or?
Oh, actually, it did come up, yeah. So if you're,
Yeah, so just go to, yeah, gain AXP experience, there you go. And then you put the guidelines up there somewhere. The actual program. Requirements, maybe overview. Or experience. Requirements. And then scroll, then you'll see there the actual experience areas and the number of hours associated with those experience areas.
This one here.
The ones in blue there. Under experience areas under the title. Yeah, then if you click on practice management, it will give you the breakdown
of the criteria.
Yeah, and you can just take all of that and make it landscape architecture centered.
for each one of these areas.
Correct.
Okay.
So you can see the bottom there, 3,740 hours.
In my perfect scenario, Clark would work with NCARB, and they form an agreement, and they would take it,
Yeah.
modify it, and then pick it out to all.
And you all guys can push that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Push them into the corner.
But back to the question, I support an experience on the lead pathway. And in the interim, I am comfortable with licensed landscape architects signing off hours equaling 600 hours. And I'm comfortable with
Where did
landscape.
you get the 600?
I'm sorry, 6 years. Thank you. Thank you.
That's a lot less.
That's right, you're not right.
I'm not doing that. 6 years. And the 6 years of experience, I'm comfortable with a percentage of that coming from experience out of state, too, or out of state experience.
Well, the way it's worded, it would cover in-state or tax.
Okay.
Some of our other programs with work experience actually have a little asterisk that you know would be signed off, and what you could do is you can take some of the knowledge and skills and abilities that again are in your exam plan, and that could be part of the affidavit, so that the licensed landscape architect is saying, yes, we've done, you know, site assessment. Again, link it back to how you have defined your profession. So they're basically saying, yep, they've worked in these areas.
If we did do that, it would have to be in regulation, it's certain that it can't just say, you know, on the form that they do it, it would have to be that their employment verification form.
Is that really cumbersome, Becky?
You know, I don't know that anyone has done that. I would have to research that. I think years ago, they, like in our program, they had that, and they also rated them on their performance, which, whether or not it was satisfactory or not, it's evolved over the years to what can be required in regulation.
So, you know, I think Mark, you know, evolution is good. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So keep on going and we'll go to
Okay. Evolution is good because our experience pathway, the only experience documentation was IDP, which was, as I said earlier, time-based, kind of like where you're at now. So you can have the mentor. It's, you know, it's that supervisor, that landscape architect's responsibility and contribution back to the profession that he's taken someone and has mentored them and served the apprenticeship under them to get to the point to sit for the exam. Because we're only talking about sitting for the exam.
Exactly.
They still have to pass the exam. So to get up to that doorway, I think is a good place to start. And then you could evolve into a structured CLXP and everything else.
John?
So would this apply to people who are seeking reciprocity as well?
I would say yes, but that is a pathway for them.
The committee had decided at one of the prior meetings that whatever we come up with the initial requirements, reciprocity candidates will just have to meet it, whatever those requirements today. So, yeah, we'll probably.
If the CAB was concerned that it would be a double standard, so.
That's part of the reason we're here. The board really identified that we were incongruent, that the standards for reciprocity were going to be more flexible than our initial licensure standards.
So I have a question, I guess. So, I don't know, I think in presentations I've seen from LITC in the past, there's been kind of this idea of like a three-legged stool, right? Is that the right slide that I'm remembering? Which is like, that there's, that there's, it's, I think, education, experience, and exam, the 3 E's. And so, now we're talking about, is it a two-legged stool, or, and is that enough? Or, is there a way that, we're really, what we're saying is that the experience has some component to it that is education, and that can be verified, and that can satisfy the educational components. And it sounds like the AXP might be one of those ways to do it. But I guess in lieu of that, of having like a CLXP, I'm not sure, or a continuing education program, I just question, how do we, where's that third leg?
Yeah, I personally see that third leg as the experience, the extra experience that gives within that six-year component.
Yeah, because, what is experience? In the context that we're speaking of experience, it's really an apprenticeship.
Right.
Which is, before we had where we are in this century, that's what there was apprenticeships. And that's how you learn a profession or a craft, through apprenticeship. So knowledge is knowledge, how you acquire it. Whether you acquire it in a classroom or whether you acquire it actually practicing. I think it's valid to look at experience as education. So I don't think you're really eliminating a leg on the stool.
But the education part seems like, we've been able to kind of assign, some kind of validity to it through, the fact that it's a accredited program, and there's some kind of way to measure it, or we've kind of, decreased its weight based on the standards of different degree types.
I think what you've done, or what we've done as a subcommittee of those, we've stated that there's one credit for 1 year credit for education, related degrees and associate degrees, but there's no credit of education. So that means 6 years of experience.
So I hear that we're jumping to the year discussion, how many years that we should kind of appoint to each administrative secretary training, how many years of training or experience should be, but I wanted to give Tracy an opportunity to speak a little bit before.
Well, I just wanted to echo the comment that I do think that there is education in the experience piece of it, that you are learning in that, and again, that's why I go back to the exam plan, and maybe in regs it doesn't have to be real specific so that things change over time, you don't have to keep doing a reg change. But again, if you look at your exam plan, it talks about all the knowledge, that's the education. So in the experience, as you're getting your experience, you're also having to prove that you have this knowledge, or at least they're signing off on that, so it kind of ties it up. And that would create sort of the defensibility for this experience plan. You've got the accreditation that validates the education piece, but then you have your exam plan that's tied to the experience, and then that validates that piece of it as well.
That would justify it in the regulations, but I think what the subcommittee would also need to consider, what if a person doesn't gain experience in all those areas? Does it have to be a majority of those areas, or just some of the
I think
areas?
this needs to be related to, here's what has been identified in the occupational analysis, and that you are, signing off that they have done skills related to these areas. I don't think you want to go specific, because then again, that becomes subjective when you're looking at people's descriptions of what they've done in reciprocity. Then it just can be general, but again, it just at least ties it back to something.
The only thing I would also add to that, though, is this conversation is that with regard, when someone follows the experience-only pathway, there is a lot of self-study and knowledge gathering. and learning. It's not in an academic arena. So the proof of the pudding is actually going to be passing the exam. So they can, you know, if they've gained this knowledge through experience and they sit for the exam and they pass it, well, guess what? You've got a licensed architect or a licensed landscape architect, you know, it's just embedded. So,
Because if someone's going through the experience only pathway, they would be smart to get this, because the exam plan, they know that ultimately they've got to pass that exam, but they're trying to get experience, so rather than just doing one area, they would want to have a breadth of knowledge, so they can pass the exam, then maybe go special.
and I would think for anyone that's going to follow that pathway, what they're really doing is they're studying for the exam for 6 years. It's actually what they're doing. Prepare
Before
themselves.
we open it to public comment, we have two hands in the back. I wanted to go through all the subcommittee members and see if everyone is in agreement. Yes, we should have an experience only. I've heard from 3 individuals or 3 subcommittee members, provided that there's some form of verification component attached, but for the 2 other subcommittee members, is that something you're in agreement also? And Steve?
Just one last comment. Prior to 1997, we had an experience of pathway in this state. There was one in existence. Turn over to public.
Yes. Thank you for patiently
Oh,
waiting.
no, that's okay. If experience is adopted, I think Pasquale made a comment about, you know, you can say that this person's been at a firm for 11 years. Somebody gave me an example of their firm in San Diego. And they said, this guy should be able to sit for the exam, and yet they said, but he's an irrigation specialist. In other words, that firm has used him only for that thing. And so the portfolio part and the internship part, in fact, I think it was April that LATC board members had said, yes, let's try to institute the internship. Those things are important. And I think rather than just adopting experience only, you need to put a timeline on this to develop these measurements and say within 2 years, you know, you are going to have the internship program online. You're going to have the portfolio evaluation. You've got to give yourself, you know, some ability to say we're going to accomplish this rather than just adopting it and not having any way to measure it.
My name's John Pride. I'm a licensed landscape architect in the state of Washington. I am one of the few experience-only individuals. I was a licensed landscape contractor here in the state for 20 years. I was also a licensed contractor in the state of Washington for 3 years, from the time I was 17 to 21. I've been doing this since I was 11 years old. My experience is mostly as a design-build contractor, but under the guidelines of a lot of pretty well-known landscape architects on top of it. But I also hired landscape architects as part of my design staff. So my experience, as well as through architects and engineers and so forth, so the people that vouch for me prove my competency. But to get back to what Pasquale was saying, in order for me to get to where I went to, and I'm not taking away from the GE part of it, but technically landscape architecture is 2 years of class time. It's spread out in some schools now over 4, but it's still really 2 years of dedicated class time. And then 2 years of internship. That's the easiest pathway to get to where you want to go. I had to spend another 4 years on top of, well, 6 years technically of experience to gain that additional knowledge. But then, to sit for the exam, I spent 3.5 years studying, reading textbooks that some of you all read when you were taking going to class, cover to cover, in order to pass that exam. The exam is made up of, well, when I took it, 5 sections: law, D was construction-related techniques and proficiency, C was site design. Now, some people, some firms do site design, but there was nothing about landscape design and site design. I'm learning how to site buildings on properties, dealing with untold numbers of things, and then grading and drainage. Now, I don't know how far grading and drainage goes in regular standard undergraduate study, but I know how to grade a road now. At what point does a landscape architect ever grade a road? That's what civil engineers are for. But I gained that knowledge and passed the exam. And of course, and B was via inventory analysis and programming. But in order to be proficient in that, I had to gain that knowledge. So to say that we aren't as qualified to sit for that exam is nuts. I mean, as an example, Mr. Jacobs he can't sit for it yet, but is his qualifications as good as anybody else's to sit for the exam, and what he has to do to study, pass it? I think so. So to me, going back to all of the experience that some of us have as a contractor as well, is going back to the experience aspect of building or creating the built environment after the fact. And so I think it's important to kind of go through that process. Now, I've been licensed now for 5 years. That's another issue. And how do you deal with that? Forgetting what my experience was for the last 30 some odd years. That all has to be part of the equation. And I don't know, meaning I think there's ways to establish this sooner than later, but then develop what you talked about specifically with this CLXP program that you implement over a period of time. But create a basic set of guidelines so that people can get involved sooner than later, and then develop a program across the board.
Thank you. And so, is it okay with the subcommittee if we move on to the next slide in terms of allotting the number of years of experience that will be acceptable? Did you all want to do the flashcards, or did you want us to go around the room?
Probably just as easy to go around the room as you want us to write it.
So, who would like to start us off?
So we're going from the total of 6 again.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure, I guess, about, so if we don't have, so, when would this take effect? And, if this takes effect, in advance of having, some kind of way to certify through like a CLXP, I think that creating this, this pathway without those standards for, for this interim time, I'm not sure that that's a 5-year, 6-year thing. I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with that and that.
Personally, I think, 6 years, to finish this business, 6 years is, I think we have to decide on that. And then I think we have to decide on a timetable where some sort of structured, identifiable internship or experience program would be in place. And then that's the ignition point of the experience-only pathway. Because if you go before then, and it's just a sign-off, you're probably going to see an avalanche of applications.
But they still have to pass the test.
They still have to pass the test. Yeah. I'm just talking about equity.
Right. I'm comfortable with, as soon as this gets through the process, which will take some time, it has to go up to the architect's board, or it has to go to the LATC, then up to the architect's board, and then it has to go through a whole pathway at the Capitol to become regulation.
Right, it's through the agencies, but yes, there's a rulemaking process that'll take a year to 18 months.
So if we decided today that we want to move forward with this signature of landscape architect, it's going to be 18, 24 months,
Right.
2 years.
But another back door would be to say just the signature, because you're still having a landscape architect qualify that person is ready to take the exam. But that's all they're doing, is they're making the statement they're ready to take the exam. And they have to pass the exam. You could maybe make that more than 6 years until you get the AXP program or the LXP program in place, then it can fall back to 6 years.
I think that's up to the subcommittee to decide. I like Tracy's thoughts about the form that's signed, that there's some kind of component that ties back to the test. KSAs, right?
Yeah. And that's yet another pathway. Just tie the sign off back to the test. So because it's really a qualification to take the test, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. There's a lot of pathways.
Yeah.
Steve, Nathan, John, I'd love to hear what you guys think about this transition period, years, stuff like that.
For me, I haven't taken the exam. I've heard about it. I've heard it's very challenging. And what are the chances of somebody that doesn't have, let's say they claim they have the experience, or somebody signs off for them and they really don't have a really good amount of experience, what are the chances of them passing this exam? I mean, can somebody
If
just
they-
have
if they
book
don't-
knowledge and
In
pass this
architecture,
exam?
it's never happened.
No, it's gonna be very difficult to do them.
Yeah, so and what I heard earlier, I'm guessing about, 4 to 5 years of a college degree is really 2 years of actually working in landscape architecture classes specific to landscape architecture. Was that correct? Is that what I understood?
I don't think it's quite
I don't
like
think
that.
it's quite that. I think.
So it's a little bit less than that?
No, I think it's
More?
more.
For the
A little more.
Yeah, for a degree in landscape architecture, I know it's typically about 5 years. I know you can get it done in 4, but you certainly can't be doing much else. So what would you say is courses that are directly related, not general education courses, but out of a 5-year degree in landscape architecture, how much of that 5 years is dedicated specifically to landscape architecture?
Well, in a 4-year degree at UC Davis, I'm figuring about 2.5 years is really core, and maybe even just a little bit more than that because some of the related geology and some of that stuff. But say 2.5. I feel comfortable saying 2.5 years out of 4 at UC Davis are really.
But it's spread over 4.
Right.
It's spread over.
It's spread over 4 plus.
Right.
Yeah, but yeah.
Same with Cal Poly.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm leaning towards something around 6, maybe 7 years of experience only would be somewhat of a number that I'm comfortable with.
I'm comfortable with a little extra time, like 7-year period, until we get a structured program in, and then we can look at adjusting. To me, that's.
So Dennis had created a chart for kind of before the CLXP is established or those guidelines are established and after those guidelines are established. So if you want to give us, as you're going, as you're sharing the number of years of credit, I guess kind of think about the two dynamics of, this is before we have the extra guidelines and after we have the established guidelines, what should the years be? So Steve, you said 6 to 7 years?
Yeah, so I would say pre would be 7 and then the post would be 6.
I'm changing my mind. I have a problem with different than the regular. I think that causes problems, so I'm going to stand on 6, pre and post.
Are they identifying recommended credit just on landscape architecture experience? Is that what you're assessing the years for now?
Yes.
You're looking at just landscape architecture experience?
I would say 6 also because I think it's kind of arbitrary by,
Right.
just because there's no program in place, we shouldn't do this CLXP thing. 6 should be. Yeah.
6 for both.
6.
Yeah, I would be in I guess a higher than that. At 6 or 7, like the maybe 6 after there was the CLXP 7.
It seems like this.
That's pretty easy. That one.
And then for the next one. So just kind of getting that feedback, what is the concern with having the guidelines before or after?
Well, without
Because
having
the
the
verification-
guidelines before, it's rather arbitrary. It's 6 or 7, and what is that? And what is that based on? What is the person having demonstrated they've done in practice during those years? We don't know. If there is a CLXP or whatever it's called program, then it's prescribed and we have to do those certain things. It's not arbitrary at all, and it's do it or you don't, and then you're eligible to take the exam.
You know, discussing the CLXP concerns me because it's really not in motion yet.
No, it's not.
It's a concept. It's
Yeah.
not something that may never come to fruition. So I think that we need to just focus on experience only and a component that we can deal with.
Does the experience only sign form, does it talk anything about the areas of experience, or does it just say experience?
It has to be crafted because it's not
Well,
existing.
but when
The one we, the one's in place now.
Oh, you're right.
Point of verification.
The current one allows the supervisor to list the type of experience, but we don't enforce, like, we don't require that they have certain areas.
So the form does ask the.
It is time-based.
It is time-based, but is it time-based, I'm sorry.
They
I'm
do
trying to
provide
understand
that
exactly
information.
what the person who signs the form, I'm trying to understand exactly what it is they're stating.
Yeah, they can list out the details of the work that was done and what capacity what was performed, but we don't, when we're reviewing those documents, we don't make sure that they list anything specifically. We have boxes for them to check what capacity they have played for the individual work and then expand on that. They can expand on that. But we don't require, we review all that, but we don't require that it says anything.
So, if I'm a supervisor, landscape architect, and someone wants me to sign off on their experience, I state what areas of experience they have, but you're not gonna look at that?
We don't require any, like, it's not in our requirement right now that they show us that they have experience in X, Y, and Z. We just,
And to require that, that requires regulation, okay, modification, so that slides over the transition
Right.
thing, yeah, right. So right now, as a landscape architect, citing for someone, sit for the exam, I would just say they have the 6 years of experience in design.
I think it's in terms of hours. I say this many hours, and I filled out that form.
So right now, we allow employment as or employed by landscape architect licensed jurisdiction. We also allow employment as civil engineer and also landscape contractor. So similar to that. And I think, let's clarify a little bit what you're saying, Courtney, because I think that's an important remark. The form, they don't specify what area of landscape architecture they're performing, right? It just says they work under their direct supervision.
correct, it's up to the individual filling out the form to give us that information. We don't require that they put all that. It's because we do, so we do. What I'm trying to say, sometimes we do collect that information if it's provided, but it's not required. We have an empty space on the form for them to fill out.
So as a landscape architect, if I was signing this for someone, I may be doing them a disservice if they weren't actually prepared to take that exam and had knowledge and experience of all the parts of the exam. I would actually be doing them a disservice if they're gonna sit for that exam and, right?
Potentially.
But you're doing what's needed for your firm, so whatever employment capacity that person is in.
You'd have to hope that they
Yeah.
took it upon themselves to prepare themselves completely for the exam. Yeah, which is lends to someone's credibility and, you know, so.
So
Yeah.
just for my clarification, again, the committee does not have an experience-only pathway right now. So if the committee decides to promulgate regulations and have an experience-only pathway, it still wouldn't be in effect until your regulations have been approved. So it wouldn't really matter whether you have a pre-CLXP, because then you would still have to develop some kind of a guideline as you're doing your regulations after that time.
And because of that not being in motion, I'd like to have us look at experience only without the qualifier pre-CLXP. That we're looking at an experience only pathway, the mechanics to kind of be worked out. And
The transition.
yeah, but an experience only pathway.
Yeah, because I'm sure there's a lot of input on that.
Yeah.
All over the
And
place.
maybe for purposes of this discussion right now, you specify, and that's why I kind of wanted to clarify at the beginning why they were coming up with the credit, that you specify this is in landscape architecture, because another component of this is maybe the committee also needs to consider if someone comes in with 6 years of experience as an architect, is that going to be comparable? Or you're not going to require any years as a landscape architect? Because right now we give credit, a portion of it, towards architecture, engineering, and landscape contractor. So maybe specify that right now that's what you're considering is experience only in landscape architecture.
I would advocate for that, because being a young architect is completely different than being a young landscape architect.
So then keeping that information in mind, for the number of years of training experience credit, does that change for anyone?
Yeah, I mean, just the idea of what I've heard for people who have sat for the exam, that there's no way somebody's going to pass that exam without proper training and knowledge, then I have no problem changing from 7 to 6.
If we're aligning with the California Architects Board, what is required for them for experience only? How many years?
8. Or the 8.
8 out of the 8.
8
Yeah,
out of the 8.
it's 8. So anyway,
I think the alignment.
if you're erring on the
is-
side of 7 being a better
I think
benchmark.
the conversation of alignment, correct me if I'm wrong, the conversation of alignment was to have an experience-only pathway.
Not alignment of the actual credit, just the
class. Yeah, and I guess I'm not sure that there is alignment in absence of alignment in other areas, being the alignment of either, you know, the total experience years or alignment in the fact of having a kind of a verifiable internship development program or experience at AXP type of a you know, that's part of the pathway in that package. So I think that's why, because I'm, you know, that's why I, you know, have 7 there, is because I can't say that, you know, as it exists today without, you know, that process that it's in alignment.
Love to hear from more public comment on this issue.
But just going back to the difference between whether it's 6 or 8, architects have the ability to do the structural engineering still, even though most won't, but some do. I have one of my architect clients does his own structural. We're not allowed to do that. So there's a difference between why I think architects need more time, because you have so much more technical knowledge to know. Forget the fact that you can also design landscapes on top of it, but just from a structural and a design aspect of things, that's why that time frame makes sense. Ours is a little less technical. We have to be knowledgeable of structural issues, but we're not allowed to physically do them. And that's why we rely on structural engineers to take care of that. So the difference to me, I think, makes sense. It's, you know, we have a certain amount of things we have to have basic knowledge in, but that's where, again, structural, civil, et cetera, all come into play. And then we work as a team, but architects have the ability to do everything.
Yeah, and I think the 8 years is not just experience. 8 years is a combination of education and experience. So.
I just want to frame this in sort of context of actual numbers. Last year, there was only 76 licenses granted in landscape architecture in the state. So we're not talking big numbers here. The number of people looking for reciprocity, you know, there's just handfuls. I mean, anything you do, it's going to be a trickle-in effect, I believe.
Yeah, just to back that, I apologize. I don't think floodgates aren't going to open. There just aren't going to be a lot of people like myself. There's a handful of people like Dustin and the guys that were at the CAB meeting back in was it July? Yeah, it doesn't matter. But I'm just saying that I think creating this avenue, irrespective of what you do with some sort of CL, what did you call it? But the point is, I think that you're going to find that there will be people who might be more interested now to potentially go down that road that have said forget it. And at the time when I first was thinking about it, it was prior to 297, and I decided I was a landscape contractor. It didn't matter. I'm able to do everything that a landscape architect does as long as I supervise it. Why do it? And then all of a sudden I decided 5 years later or whatever, maybe I might think about this, and then the work experience was gone. So I'm just saying that there's a lot of great talented people out there that are potentially, they won't consider it because they can't go through that process. But there's, when I hire people, I just hired a landscape architect licensed in California, but the overwhelming majority have been straight designers. And I'm not hiring because of the license. Some firms, maybe that's the greatest thing on the planet for them. But for me, I want the best designers. And some of them come in the form of unlicensed or designer only. And the last one that just left and moved to Thailand, I paid him $80,000 a year because he was a phenomenal designer. So from that perspective, background comes in a number of different ways, and experience only can be a tremendous opportunity for some, not all.
Yeah, and to echo what you're saying, this is really about providing a pathway to every person who's qualified in the state of California. There are people born that can't afford to go to college, and it's never going to be in the cards for them. And this is their cracking the door into our world, into adding to our profession. The engineers have it, the architects have it, we should have it too.
Any more public comment? Okay. So then, it seems like the recommendation to LATC, is everyone, I know we have majority say 6 and 1 7, but do you need to take a vote, or is?
I'm comfortable moving forward with, this is for experience only under a landscape architect. I'd like to explore experience only under an architect, civil engineer, or a C-27 licensed landscape contractor. Because I think that I'd like to have some kind of credit for that component. That's not muddying the waters too
Which
much.
we currently do.
Right.
But you probably should also consider, should it be all of that type of experience, or a portion of it be in that field, and then also.
Exactly. I'd like to have that discussion around this table. Is it a full 6? Is it 5? Is it 4? What is it?
So for this one, it would be recommendation to LATC being 6 years of landscape architecture.
Yeah.
And you said 3 things: architecture, civil engineering, and
Landscape, C-27, landscape.
C-27.
Sorry.
Steve, I'd love to hear from you. Talk to me.
Sure. I'm a design build landscape contractor. 34 years. And I think with many firms, it's going to depend on what the experience of the person had. You could work for a landscape architecture firm and just be a person who goes out and measures, and that's all you do for 8 years or 6 years or whatever. Working for me, it could be you were spending the whole time in design. I don't think that would be as good as having the experience of working in the installation process. I think it's an eye-opener for any designer that works for me, because they get that experience. A lot of designers or landscape architects design, and they're not part of the construction process. The ones that are, I think, get a lot better world experience. What works, what doesn't work. It looks good on paper, and it doesn't work in the field. It's kind of tough because when an application sounds like when it's filled out and turned in, it's not verified. It's just verified that yes, a properly licensed person is saying this person has this experience, but specifically what experience isn't looked at. So I don't know if it really matters at this point. If it was looked into, then maybe it would matter. Again, I go back to 6 years experience working for a contractor like me. I think sufficient to sit for the exam. Because I think the exam speaks for itself. If you know what you're doing, you can pass. Even if you don't, if you know what you're doing, you can fail. It sounds like it's a very difficult exam, and you could make the argument working for a C27 might better prepare somebody to sit for the exam than if they only worked for a landscape architecture firm and didn't get the construction experience.
So not to play a devil's advocate, then would you say less than 6 years if that is the case?
Possibly.
Anyone else?
Pasquale, if someone worked in an architecture.
Yeah,
and they-
what we have is that if you work under a licensed architect, you get a year's credit for a year's worth of experience. If you're not working under a licensed architect, you're getting half credit. You get half of 6 months credit for 1 year. Because as a licensed architect who signs off someone's experience verification, as the licensed architect signing that off, you're the steward of the profession. So you're making sure that that individual is well-rounded. You don't want to do it, as I said, a disservice to that individual that's going to sit for that exam. So my recommendation or my perspective would be under landscape architecture, 1 for 1, but outside of that arena, what they call, I think we call them, I forget, setting A, B, and C. We go to the other settings like a landscape architect or a civil engineer. I don't know that they're really getting the full, robust experience of a landscape architect. Writing proposals and everything else goes along with the profession. So I would be more apt to say half credit if you're not under a licensed architect, and full credit if you're under a licensed architect.
See, I almost think that a C27 is different than a licensed architect or engineer. Because C27 is they're basically doing everything I'm doing, and then they're building it. Because the design, if you're design build, you're designing it and then you're building it. So to me, that's very relatable to what a landscape architect does. An architect engineer, there's a difference there. So,
And again, this is really just only getting them eligible to take the test. Like
Exactly.
you said, they can try and take the test and they could very easily fail it. Just because they've put in that time to guarantee they're going to be successful in completing the exam. So.
But can I just be devil's advocate on that topic, which would be, why even need experience to take the exam? If the exam is the gateway, then why do you need any of this? Can anybody just take the exam? I mean, what? And so why should education be different from experience in terms of that consideration, or be discounted completely?
Maybe the argument would be, and this is maybe far-fetched, but you have people that are just really amazing at taking the exams. They're great at memorization. It may not last long, but it's enough to sit for the exam, pass it, and they don't have the background to back it up.
I would think the response would be, at the end of the day, this is about protecting the consumer.
yeah.
And to make sure, or to assure as much as we can, that the individual who passes the exam is incredibly prepared to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the consumer. That's why you need that experience.
Yeah.
You're also protecting the integrity of the exam process. If anybody can sit for it, then you're going to have people that are going to go in and try and, circumvent the exam process by memorizing questions and so forth. So you do need to set the candidates up with a certain expectation, whether it's education, experience, or a combination of, to then go in and take that exam.
I mean, in other terms, there's no substitute for experience. Just like that.
I'd like to make a proposal to the group that we move the C27 licensed landscape contractor over with a licensed landscape architect in that column and get a 1-to-1 credit, and then look at civil architecture and civil engineering as a separate.
I support that.
So right now, we give credit up to a certain max, but that might not apply. But it's self-employment as a California licensed landscape contractor or a licensed landscape contractor in another jurisdiction. So it's not working for one, it's being licensed as one.
What I'm saying is, and and/or experience working under a C-27. So, for that experience component.
So that's not the same as being a landscape contractor.
No, it's not.
So the licensed landscape contractor has already taken the test, and kind of proved themselves in one capacity, and then is eligible to take another test and prove themselves in another capacity. I think that's the
After
difference.
6 years of experience, technically, I'm licensed C-27. I guess I said for the, it would depend on how it's written, but
It's 100% credit if you're licensed. You might consider not getting the 100% credit if you're employed by one,
But I'm suggesting that it's 100% credit employed by a C-27 licensed landscape contractor.
Does a C-27 licensed contractor take the landscape architecture exam?
It's a separate.
So then you may want to have another separate category separating from this, because if you have a landscape architect working under a licensed architect in the state of California, or you have someone coming in out of state that's licensed, that's a little different than working under a C-27 landscape architecture to qualify for the exam, and or out of state because they're not a landscape architecture yet, even though they may be doing above and beyond or kind of an extra step from landscape architecture. It's not the same thing. Or
No, I think I'm comfortable the way it is because under a California C-27 landscape contractor. So what I'm suggesting is that you have to work direct experience under a licensed landscape contractor in the state of California to get that 1-for-1 credit. Or a licensed landscape architect, 1-for-1 credit.
I don't understand the C-27 qualifications or criteria. So I guess my initial reaction would be, as a consumer,
Yeah.
is that C-27 landscape contractor, does he have the same tool bag as a landscape architect?
We could ask Steve, but I would contend that his liability for his projects are probably more so that he design builds than mine as a designer, or they're similar.
It's because I don't understand.
Yeah, I don't know all the.
I'd say, yeah, the liability is definitely there. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
We design it and we put it in. There's nobody else to point to. There is an argument, though, that there are landscape contractors that just do irrigation, just do soil prep, just do water features, just do lighting. So, and then if you say, okay, it's only design build landscape contractors, well, how do you it's not a specific designation by the state, it's a designation by the individual company who chooses to practice what they practice.
When I said that same tool bag, I was kind of referring to these substantial letters that you receive, emails, and the criteria was repeated over and over again about what's needed to actually qualify somebody for landscape, to be a landscape architect. And it was, what was it? Would a C-27 understand grading and drainage, stormwater management, vegetative fuel management, erosion control, soils, wetlands restoration, river and waterway restoration, plant water conservation, habitat restoration, invasive species, grading and other best practices? Does that fall within the domain of a C-27?
And I guess it depends. I mean, those things you listed, I understand those things.
Okay.
Does that mean every C-27 does? Probably not.
Is it required for a C-27 to get that license to understand that criteria?
No. Not all of it. Some of it, yes, but not all of that.
But they still have to sit for the landscape architect
That's right.
exam and pass it in order
Right.
to get that license.
That's true. Okay.
And I think it all goes back to that. I think a lot of what we're discussing today has all to do with passing that exam. And I agree with the argument about the experience. I had an excellent education, and I have learned 95% more by being in the field. I mean, I have that education, which most of my competition doesn't. most C-27s probably don't have degrees in horticulture or irrigation. It just helps me that much more. But there's, as you stated before, there's no trade for experience. It is by far the most important part of what I do every day.
Subcommittee's going to, I'd love to hear from the public on this issue of me moving this component over.
I think that there is a difference between an owner, like Steve and I were, or was, versus an employee. But, and again, Steve's correct, there's not many like us that were so focused on what we did. But the one thing, just to be clear, to clarify as well, is that the business profession code of the LATC is that we are allowed to design anything and everything. We have to supervise its construction, but we can design anything. There's no limits as to what we can do. Once you get rid of your C-27, then all bets are off. But that at least allows us to do that. So that's where it gets back to the C-27. Having the capability, whether they do it or not, is a separate issue. And whether they're good at it, if they do it, is a separate issue. But in the end, it's that exam that's the barometer that tells the state that we're competent enough to be now become licensed for that purpose, whatever that background is. So there is a gray area between working under and actually being the guy that holds the license. So but in the end, I think having the ability to also be vouched for by a landscape contractor if you're an employee, especially in the design-build atmosphere. I can't imagine a contractor, I'm sure there probably are, but I can't imagine a contractor saying, yeah, you're qualified when maybe you're not. So, and again, it's the test that drives the end result.
Yes.
My concern about putting a landscape architect with the C-27 is that you as a regulatory body have control over the landscape architect.
Can you speak up?
Sorry, the landscape architect, the board has, or the committee has authority over that, whereas the C-27 is not under the purview of this committee board. So that's my only concern about having them together in this.
Excellent point. We'll separate them.
And another public comment?
So I am a retired C-27, and I have to say there's no education experience requirement to have a C-27 license. The test is a very different animal from what the LARE is. And a qualifying individual as a C-27 I think is a higher level of responsibility and recorded completion of tasks and not having yourself reported against. I have to say, I'm sorry, maybe I'll make some enemies in the contracting world here, but I don't think that working for a qualified individual, a C-27 owner, is the same thing by any stretch. As I've heard from my former employees who went on to get their own C-27 licenses, it's a completely different animal. So I would like to see it separated, and I quite honestly have to say I don't think that the test itself is in any way comparable to a degree or anything else in terms of qualification. It really is understanding the law and your liability obligations rather than detailed horticultural or technical knowledge about landscape contracting.
Well, since I made the motion for suggesting that, I'd like to strip that back out.
Just a comment, the exam, the C-27 exam is split up into two phases. One is the trade, half of it's trade, half of it's law. Just so everybody's clear that it's not just the law.
So then, should we put back the C-27 in the? And so, any thoughts from the subcommittee as to what the number of years should be for architecture?
Well, you said
Yeah,
50%.
50%, yeah.
You said
Half of a year.
three.
Right.
3 of the 6.
I think you need to clarify, is that licensed, all those categories as the licensed experience or qualified or both?
Licensed.
Or employed by.
No.
Or both.
Or both, yeah, so do you want
Employed by a licensed landscape architect, contractor, or architect.
Or you are one.
Correct.
so same amount of credit regardless if you're an employee of one or the licensee?
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but one crazy thing about what we just said is if you're a licensed architect, you can sign landscape architectural documents. Or civil engineers.
But you can't call yourself a landscape architect.
Right, without, yeah, you get 3 years credit then, yeah. Okay.
Anyone else? What's the number of years credit?
I'm okay with 3. You can write 3 down for me.
3? Nathan,
I
Should
have
be
a question.
12.
On the previous slide. Yeah. So we're saying, in essence, if we say 3 on the second one, that you need twice as many years experience working under or employed by a licensed architect as you do by one of these other trades.
Not necessarily twice as many, but I would assume the difference would be in another area. So if you say 3 years credit, it would be 100% credit in that employment for license, as your license. And then the other 3 years, you have to gain some other way, whether it be in landscape architecture or education. Because right now, they give 1 year max credit for a civil engineer and 4 years max credit for a C-27.
So in this proposal, we're stepping back to C-27
Right,
from
stepping
4 to 3 years.
And Courtney, you correct me anytime.
No, that's
For the experience only path.
Yeah.
So what's the existing?
Existing right now, civil engineer, employed by or self-employment, max credit 1 year, and licensed landscape contractor. And that doesn't allow employment by, just licensed as, max 4 years credit.
But that has an education component.
Right now, yes, it does.
Whereas this doesn't have an education
Right,
component.
right.
I think that's the.
Yeah, I agree.
But I just want to make sure that they're aware that by lowering it to 3, you're shaving off 1 year that we're allowing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I would keep it at 4 or more. I would keep it at 4 or more and shaving it off baseline.
4 or more.
He's looking at the pathways, how C-27 offers 4 years of experience.
It's
Oh,
max.
sorry,
4.
max. Is it max 4
It's
years?
max 4.
Yeah, okay.
So you're saying 4?
Oh, wait, sorry. I'm confused. So that's 4 additional years of, you would need 4 additional years of,
You could work in that capacity up to 4 years and get 100% credit. The remaining 2
Would have to be from
might have to
something.
be something else.
so then I would say 2. So 2 or 3 for the experience credit.
So we're saying we still have the number of 6 that has to be achieved. And so whatever the balance is so far, unless it's some other avenue, it's education.
But it could
Or
be these
another
other
type of
things.
experience.
Or some other
Right.
type of experience, yeah, from a licensed landscape architect.
Right, right.
Question?
Well, by clumping that all together, if you have a max credit, you're
Yeah.
you're limiting it even more. So you might want to separate them out. If you're going to say 3 years is the max credit allowed, and you're pooling all those together, unless you mean 3 years is the max credit allowed per profession.
So what we're saying is this could be, let's say it's the 3 years, and you could have worked for a licensed landscape architect for another couple of years, and that would satisfy the difference between architect and landscape architect. It's delineated here.
Okay.
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
should we be reducing the current 4 years working as a C27 to 3? I guess that's, I'm almost thinking maybe we should stay 4. Of course, we would be adding possibly that, do you have to be a C27 or just work for a C27?
There's a slight discrepancy in that currently it's 4 years as a contractor or working for a contractor with 1 year minimum education. In this scenario, there'd be no education, so yeah, so it doesn't quite match up.
In this state, it's not employment under, it's just licensed. Right now, currently, the credit is licensed.
Only licensed.
Right, not under working.
And I guess we need to choose that too. Do we want it to be only?
Yeah.
And I'm guessing it's only the licensee, not. I mean, there's the qualifying partner, the one who actually, the person who passes the exam. Because you can be a licensed landscape contractor and not be the qualifying partner.
It doesn't specify that in the regulation right now.
So then, from what I'm reading on there is that if I have 3 years, if I am a licensed architect, and I have 3 years of experience, I can apply to get my landscape architecture license. And then if I went to and had maybe a bachelor's degree in architecture, or then I can come in, or does that second component need to be specifically landscape architecture related? Even though architecture is.
No, this is experience only.
The years should be higher if it's experience only.
Okay, but you still have to satisfy your 6-year requirement, right?
With other experience.
With other experience, and I heard that it can be education or it can be a different work experience, and maybe under a landscape architecture. So then if I'm a licensed architect and I come in and I have 3 years of experience and I have an environmental design license, bachelor's degree, then how do I apply? Or would I qualify for the
2 years or 1 year credit? I can't remember.
We haven't decided that.
Yeah.
Whatever credits that we get you.
Okay, so then are you completely eliminating education, or you're just saying there's 3 years? Because I'm.
Still has to equal 6.
Yeah, so I like Vicki's point about 3 years per profession. So you could get 3 years as a civil engineer, 3 years as a C27, and that would total your 6.
I like that also. I like,
Diversity.
yeah.
Because then you still maintain that experience pathway, something other than a landscape architect engineer.
So does it matter to the subcommittee that you can come up with a combination of those credits and none of it be experience in landscape architecture? If it doesn't matter to the committee, then coming up with the separate types of credit would fit that. If it matters,
With
then
those 3 groups, no, that does not matter. Those 3 subject areas.
If it's total, I'm confused. If the total is supposed to be 6, would it be 2 years for each of these professions, or?
No.
3 years max per profession.
Okay.
So they don't care if it's a consensus, they don't care that it be a combination of those to equal the 6 and none of it be in landscape architecture.
Mark said that.
Yeah.
The others haven't really
So
said.
that, I don't know the consensus of the subcommittee.
So is this capturing for your comment.
That's capturing.
Can you do it, press the escape button so we read it? I don't know that you
Yes,
need
I'm
the Google
uncomfortable.
6. but-
Yeah, I think it's,
I'm uncomfortable with someone getting 3 and 3 and never working for a landscape architect.
I guess, what's your exposure to the profession? And I mean, I know you have an exposure to the profession through kind of working with other professionals. If you were, as an architect or landscape contractor, you probably, have some type of working relationship with them, but you're not seeing the world through the eyes of a landscape architect.
Right.
And it goes back to that kind of mentorship and kind of mentoring the profession and moving the profession together that you mentioned in architecture. That's kind of the responsibility of the licensed architect, the licensed landscape architect is to provide that, as a licensed individual, to provide that mentorship.
I think you said it simply by, we don't look at it through the same lens. We look at landscape architecture with one perspective. We look at it from the perspective of aesthetics, changing of the season, how it's going to affect the architecture of the building, and how the rolling hills are going to match up against it, and where the trees are going to be, and all that. But we don't look at it from that same lens as a landscape architect with regards to relevant plant species, the types of irrigation, stormwater management. We kind of know generally about that. But erosion control, we can just touch on those things. We can't go to that depth that a landscape architect would. We're not trained that way.
Just so everyone, I don't know if everyone's aware, right now currently in regulation, we require 1 year in the landscape architect as part of that 6 year.
I mean, I would think that you would need at least 1 year under a landscape architect just to get that exposure to, a licensed professional's perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, because if you would have flipped the chart and said this, we're talking about architecture here, we basically would say that someone experience only pathway could become fit for the architectural exam and never work for an architect.
And you, Marcus?
Yeah, I was going to add that our equivalent for architects is we have a cap of 2 years for individuals who work under a structural or civil engineer and or who work under a landscape architect. Now that credit is at half. So, and then it's any combination working under the civil engineer or landscape architect as long as it doesn't total more than 2 years. In the case of a general building contractor, which I would presume is similar to the C-27, we have a maximum of 1 year at 50%.
So given all that, I'm comfortable changing back to just 3 years maximum credit for any of those groups, and then they're gonna have to work with the landscape architect. Get their years another way, that has a landscape architect.
I think you have to have that ingredient in there.
I think if you do that, you would have to be able to justify why you're lowering the C-27 from 4 to 3.
And is that because there's an education component? Is that offensive?
But it's allowing more right now. It's giving them 4 years max credit at 100%. With the education component.
Or we can separate the C-27 on another column and make them 4 years.
So when we do the regulation package, we have to be able to justify how it's different than what we allow right now.
Well, maybe it's easier just to separate it out.
Civil engineer, 1 year max, and licensed landscape contractors, 4
Wait,
years.
you're talking about dropping it from 4 to 3, right? The inequity is 1 year.
Right.
So maybe it's easier to just make it 3 because you are creating a new pathway for experience only,
That's true.
which you don't have now.
So then the recommendation to the LATC committee would be 3 years max?
Total.
Not per profession, just 3 years max.
3 years max in the whole category for any of those. Any combination of those things, 3 years max.
this recommendation comes with request from, or modification of the other, right, the other four.
Yeah.
Right now it allows four.
Right,
So,
just for the
But
one
that's-
type.
yeah.
It is specifically say by a licensee 27, not working for them. It's
Right,
saying
it's
you have to
licensed
be
as-
Or
the-
by,
So that's my question, does this get changed? The
Yeah,
one
we-
that's already there,
We would have to amend it and justify it.
so why does it have to be amended if it's different?
Because our language up here says licensed or employed by, so that's
Right.
duplicate.
Right, you could change that to be just employed by.
And then we would want to add a licensed architect or civil engineer component to it. So we have it already on the books. So we want to change this language to employed by a licensed.
So take out or licensed. Say employed by a licensed architect, civil engineer, construction and landscape contractors.
Taking out the language. So you're, if I understand you right, you're trying to preserve what's already in there and then just add to it?
Yeah.
If you do that, you should probably specify what's already in there so it gets captured as you're still allowing it and what credit you're giving for it.
And then we may double back and make recommendations to alter some of what's already in there. Or
Yeah,
not.
because if you only list there, we're assuming you're not preserving what's already in there. We're going by what you're recommending here.
But we do want to preserve what's in.
So if you want to preserve it, then I suggest you capture it somehow on there and identify credit for it. And we tell you whether or not it's already existing or it'll be a difference.
Okay. So we need to go through each one of those items.
So, so considering that we're at 12:30
easy
right now,
lunch.
maybe everyone needs some like food to get everyone from board. So why don't we go ahead and take our lunch?
Give us an hour? Is that enough for you? 45
Half hour?
minutes?
45 minutes, talk about.
45 minutes?
Take a 45-minute break.
1:15, we come back?
Self-employment.